Chapter 86. Miss, you and this brother are friends, and this brother and I feel like old friends at first sight. Speaking of which, the two of us can be said to be fated. Third young master said, since that's the case, may I ask for your name? It would be more convenient for us to meet in the future. F***ck off. Staya said straightforwardly. What she said didn't match her identity as the princess of the empire. After listening for a long time, he finally understood what this person meant. It turned out that he was a licentious young master. Moreover, looking at this face that even Stee had to admit was very good-looking, Stee felt that just based on this face alone, it was enough to conclude that many ignorant girls must have fallen into the hands of this scum. No matter if he was a knight of light who respected females, a saintess with a high status, or just a female, he was a thorn in Staya's side. Let's go. Staya pulled Jilin's arm and walked out while saying to Jilin, she is cooking for you guys in our temporary residence. She asked me to call you guys back for dinner. She knows how to cook. Jilin was shocked. I really didn't know how, of course. Staya said, but there was a hint of malice in her voice. Wait, the third prince called. Brother, it seems like the three of you have never been to the capital. You must have something important to do this time. If you have any trouble in the future, you can come and find me here. The third prince's words were very warm and polite, but Staya and Jilin ignored him and left without looking back. Young master, why did you do that? Zhao Qi asked curiously. No matter how he looked at it, the young master and that country bumpkin just now didn't seem to have a good conversation. The third prince thought for a while and said, don't you think that girl is very special? Zhao Qi heard this and froze for a second. He frowned and understood. His young master's bad habit of loving every girl he met was acting up again. Young master once said that every woman is unique and has their own uniqueness. Even though Zhao Qi was feeling very helpless, she still did her best to cooperate with her young master. That's true. The third prince made his trusted subordinate choke. But she is very, very special. Yes, Zhao Qi nodded. He thought that every girl said the same thing. Special, very special, Zhao Qi. The third prince called softly. His voice seemed to contain endless emotions. Young master, please. Zhao Qi said. Do you know a poem? The third prince said, there is a beauty. I will never forget her. If I don't see her for a day, I will go crazy. I know, Zhao Qi replied. How could he not know? Zhao Qi had followed the third prince for many years. He had indeed learned many things, including poems and songs. Among them, Zhao Qi first learned this poem, because every time the third prince saw a girl he liked, he would recite this poem. After reciting it for 2 days, he would begin to roam the 4 seas in search of a beautiful woman. He would search the entire city for her. Then, there was the story of keeping a mistress in a golden house. The third prince made a vow of eternal love to the girl, saying that he would hold her hand and grow old together. They would be of one mind forever. They would be together until death. Zhao Qi could clearly see that every promise she made was absolutely sincere and sincere. She was not deceiving her. The third prince's sincerity, coupled with his eloquence, even if he could not move the heavens or the earth, it was no problem to move the inexperienced girl in front of the third prince. Finally, it was helping each other in times of need is better than forgetting each other in the pugilistic world. Although these things sounded a little immoral and had endless consequences, Zhao Qi had never tried to persuade the third prince, because the third prince was always able to handle these things very well. But this time, it was a little different. Young master, these 3 people are not from the capital, Zhao Qi said. So what? The third prince said. These are troubled times. These 3 people have extraordinary strength. Moreover, they chose to enter the city at this time. Although I may be overthinking, it is better to be safe than sorry. If these 3 people really have bad intentions, then wouldn't young master be inviting trouble? Zhao Qi said. Inviting trouble? The third prince said, this is the capital. What kind of trouble can come to me? Heavenly fire, Zhao Qi said. The third prince was silent for a long time. Is there a need to be so careful? It's always good to be careful. Zhao Qi said. If you were always so careful, wouldn't life be too boring? The third prince said, Moreover, I stay in the brothel every day. Isn't this being careful and protecting myself? It's a special time. Zhao Qi said. How's a special time? The third prince still felt that Zhao Qi was making a mountain out of a molehill. The Middle Empire is connected by mountains and seas. It has a vast territory and is the largest empire in the human world. There are more than tens of millions of people in the empire. Such a big empire. Was there not a single day of trouble? You are making a fuss over nothing. Young master, it's like this. Zhao Qi felt that if he didn't pull the young master out of the wine jar, he wouldn't be able to hold on any longer. He planned to tell the young master about the recent situation. How could he let the young master fall in love with each other every day? More than a month ago, 16th young master took advantage of the few days when Lord Sword Saint was participating in the Battle of Snowfire to plot a rebellion. On the 28th of February, he led the 3,600 soldiers of the Left Guard camp to attack the Imperial Palace in a futile attempt to overturn the universe. 16th young master, the third prince thought for a moment. When won? Yes, Zhao Qi said. But as far as I know, on the 28th of February, Lord Sword Saint had already been back for several days. The third prince said, Yes, but Lord Sword Saint was heavily injured in the Battle of Snowfire. After returning, he went into seclusion to recover and hasn't come out. Zhao Qi said, I know this. The third prince said, But even if Lord Sword Saint was heavily injured, how could Li Wenruan have the guts to rebel under Lord Sword Saint's watch? Even if he wanted to rebel, it wouldn't be his turn. That fourth prince, sixth prince, and seventh prince, aren't they all eagerly thinking about this matter? How could he be the one to take the lead? According to Prime Minister's conjecture, he should have been used as a tool. Zhao Qi said. HM? The third prince said curiously. Where did you hear this from, Prime Minister? Taiji Palace, when Prime Minister was drinking tea with His Majesty. Zhao Qi said. You even have people in Taiji Palace? The third prince was shocked. Young master spends his days in a drunken stupor, indulging in women. As a subordinate, I naturally have to do my best. Zhao Qi said. You're too much. The third prince said angrily. This subordinate deserves to die. Zhao Qi said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner. He didn't have any intention of admitting his mistake. Indulging in women, that's admiration, that's respect. Do you understand? I'm cherishing women. So, that's the main point. Zhao Qi thought to himself. Young master. Zhao Qi had no choice but to interrupt his young master's incessant speech. Otherwise, his young master would probably spend 4 hours explaining to him the essential difference between him and a perverted scoundrel. All right, you can continue. But Little 16th's rebellion isn't a big deal. How many of the palace guards and soldiers were injured? The third prince saw that Zhao Qi was really anxious and stopped joking with him. None were injured. Zhao Qi said, What happened? The third prince asked. 16th young master was captured by General Luo in front of the palace gate. Zhao Qi said, General Luo? The third prince thought for a moment and said in surprise, Could it be Luo Yu? Yes. Zhao Qi said, The nephew of the Southern Marshal, Luo Fenghu. Little 16th was the former commander of the Left Guard camp. The third prince couldn't believe it. Yes. Zhao Qi said, 16th young master can let this person continue to stay in the Left Guard camp? The third prince asked. Yes. Zhao Qi said. 16th young master still led him and his soldiers to rebel. The third prince asked. Yes. Zhao Qi said. Then little 16th young master is really pitiful. The third prince sighed. Didn't even touch the palace gate, right? Yes. Zhao Qi said. How could the royal family produce such a piece of trash? The third prince cursed. Yes. Zhao Qi said. Can you use another word? The third prince said bitterly. Don't you think it's a little perfunctory? Yes. Zhao Qi said. Great minds think alike with His Majesty. That's what His Majesty said. The third prince was silent for a long time. After a while, he let out a long sigh. Sigh? Fine. Let's not talk about him. It's just a small matter. The royal family has so many children. It's not a big deal to lose a few. Is there anything else? There's also the megalosaurus from the Battle of Snowfire. Zhao Qi said, His Majesty thinks it's a great enemy of the entire human race. Even so, we don't have any good ideas at the moment. We can only deal with whatever comes our way. At worst, we'll just die together. So, there's no need to talk about this. Is there anything else? The third prince said, The last one. Ever since the Sword Saint entered the legendary realm, he set his sword, flowing light, as the core of the great Qianquan array. He thought it was foolproof, but he didn't expect the flowing light sword to break during the Battle of Snowfire. Zhao Qi said, The great Qianquan array. Something happened. The third prince was shocked. Of course. Zhao Qi said, How serious is it? The third prince asked in a low voice. This matter is too confidential. We don't know. Zhao Qi said. Phew. The third prince seemed to be relieved. That scared me. I can't imagine how I'd feel if I heard the details of the great Qianquan array from you. Young master, you still care about the world. Zhao Qi said. I can't say for sure. Third young master shook his head and took another big gulp of wine. Young master, you can't do this anymore. Zhao Qi said anxiously. He felt that all his words were in vain. What country, the world, the deep brotherhood, the crisis of life and death. Don't talk about waking up his young master from a drunken dream. He couldn't even cause a ripple in his young master's wine pool. The third prince waved his hand at Zhao Qi. I heard what you said just now. But what you said, even the Sword Saint and His Majesty can't solve it. What can I do? I can only drink today and drink tomorrow. Ha! I don't care. Zhao Qi looked at the third prince, who was drinking without restraint, and thought to himself, the third prince. Is he still unwilling to call His Majesty father? Chapter 87. Jilin followed Staya and carried Bane back to their temporary residence. Staya found this house through the Adventurers Union. It was located in the center of the imperial capital, beside the Fanqing Lake. There were a few willow trees planted around the house. The environment was fresh and pleasant, above average. Jilin entered the house and placed Bane on the chair in front of the dining table. He scanned the surroundings and finally stood by the window. He looked at the street outside the window and the crowd on the Fanqing Lake that annoyed him. He suddenly felt that it was a wise decision to bring Staya and the others along. Otherwise, he would not be able to do these trivial things. Yo, you're back. Aisha came out of the kitchen and greeted him enthusiastically. She was holding a rectangular wooden tray with 2 white porcelain bowls on it. Come, let's eat. I didn't expect this. Jilin exclaimed. What did you not expect? Aisha asked. Nothing, Jilin said. Jilin walked back to the table. He was very curious about what kind of food this beautiful witch would make. Jilin glanced at the bowl and then at Aisha. He felt that the bowl looked familiar. Wake up, wake up. Aisha patted Bane. Bane slowly woke up. Come, drink a bowl of hangover soup, Aisha said in a tone so gentle that it made people's hair stand on end. Bane was startled awake by Aisha's tone. He opened his eyes and saw the bowl of hangover soup in Aisha's hand. The clean white porcelain bowl was filled with a purplish-black viscous liquid. Black smoke constantly drifted out from the top of the bowl. It was obvious that this kind of thing was impossible to consume as long as one looked at it. However, the strange thing was that the fragrance that drifted out of the bowl was so sweet and enticing. What is this? Bane asked in a trembling voice. This is hangover soup, Aisha said in a sweet voice. You're making me sad. Aisha, sister. Bane swallowed and turned his neck stiffly to look at Aisha. He felt cold sweat coming out of his back. He had to lower his voice and say, We have no grudges, no grudges. Why do you have to do this? If something happens to me, it won't do you any good, right? What are you talking about? Why would sister harm you? Aisha said with a smile. This is the hangover soup specially made for you when I saw you were drunk. Good boy, drink it. Sister, Ben screamed. I was wrong. I will never drink again. Shut up, Aisha shouted. Drink it, not a drop. Bane pouted, feeling wronged. It seemed like he couldn't avoid it today. Fine. It was better to get the pain over with. Bane thought to himself. Bane took the spoon out of the bowl and put it aside. Who would want to savor this kind of thing one spoon at a time? He held the white porcelain bowl with both hands, raised his head, and began to gulp down the soup. Jilin nodded silently as he watched from the side. He thought to himself, no wonder you're a human that I like. You're such a hoodlum. Was this what Stias said to him? Even if you die, you won't regret it? Jilin felt that the soup looked familiar. Why did it look familiar? It was when he first met Aisha. He had seen Aisha make something similar with his own eyes. At that time, at the lowest level of the Red Dragon Palace, right under his nose, Aisha used a big pot that was big enough to stew 2 Banes. She boiled a pot of liquid of the same color and stirred it with a wooden stick. After a while, more than half of the stick was gone. As expected, Bane suddenly stopped after drinking half of the soup and threw the bowl on the table. The white porcelain bowl rolled on the table twice, and the remaining liquid spilled all over the table. Bane grabbed his neck with both hands and raised his head to the sky. His eyeballs were bulging out. Panting heavily, suddenly he used one of his hands to slap Jilin's arm as he screamed, "It's poisonous! It's poisonous!" "Yes, I saw it before you drank it. It was obvious." Jilin nodded calmly. "Save." Bane said the last word and fell onto the table weakly. Jilin put his finger on Bane's neck. "Not bad, he's not dead." Stia changed her clothes and came downstairs. She found a rag and started wiping the table. Aisha looked at the bowl in front of Jilin and then looked at Jilin. Jilin picked up the bowl and drank it without saying anything. His expression did not change at all. "Boring." Aisha curled her lips and said disappointedly, "This is just my clone. I can give up my sense of taste if I don't want it," Jilin said. "Then what is your real body doing?" Aisha asked. "Sleeping," Jilin said. "Do you think we will believe that?" Stia said. "Why not?" Jilin said, "You know, dragons love to sleep. That's when you have nothing to do and are bored, right?" Stia said, "If you want, you can go for hundreds of years without sleeping, right?" "Oh, you know a lot," Jilin said with a smile. "Is it from that scamming book again?" "It's the sacred book of light," Stia said. "All right, I believe you." Aisha raised her hand to stop Stia and Jilin from arguing. "Now that we are in the capital city, shouldn't you tell us why we are here?" "Why we are here," Jilin said with a smile. "Don't you already know? Are you spying on me?" Aisha said. "No, I know everything in the Red Dragon Palace, but for some reason, I didn't use this ability," Jilin said. "Then how did you know?" Aisha asked. "The Dwarf King told me, of course," Jilin said. "I didn't expect that he would tell you something like that." Aisha said. "You are guarding against us?" Stia said. "You are just a human. What a joke," Jilin said with a smile. "Plus, we went through that battle. You pointed your sword at me, and she let go of all the humans I wanted to kill. Learning from experience is one of the few advantages that humans have. You promised me first." Aisha said. "Why can't you live in peace with humans?" Stia said. "Then why can't humans live in peace with dwarves?" Jilin said. "Just because you're stronger than dwarves, you can be aggressive? Just because you're stronger, you can destroy other people's homes? Peace is broken by humans. It has always been like this." "That's what you said." Stia was startled. She didn't expect that the righteous thoughts that she always instilled in Jilin would turn out like this in Jilin's body. What was he doing? Was he going to help when he saw injustice? "Stop," Aisha said. "Okay, let's not talk about this for now. Let's talk about what we should do now. You want the god spirit?" "I have to get it," Jilin said. "Then do you know where the god spirit is?" Aisha said. "Underground." Jilin pointed at the ground. "Be more specific." Aisha said. "I can't be specific, but it could be under the entire imperial capital." Jilin said. "Then why don't you come here with your real body and search the entire imperial capital slowly?" Aisha asked. "Killing people is against the natural order. Even if I'm a dragon, how can I kill thousands of innocent people for my own selfish desires?" Jilin said. Stia, who was feeling down, instantly felt comforted when she heard Jilin's words. It seemed like her efforts were not all in vain. What Stia didn't know was that Jilin respected the essence of life, not because of the righteous thoughts that she instilled in him, but because of his mother's teachings when he was young. Also, if you want to find something in a house, you can't let the house turn into ruins, Jilin added. I see, Staya thought. Do you have any clues? Aisha asked. Jilin waved his hand, and a map made of fire elements appeared on the table. Jilin pointed at a spot and said, From a map, all the lines will pass through this point. I knew it. Aisha looked up and said. Jilin was pointing at the palace. What do you want to do? Staya asked. Rush into the palace and capture the emperor? Jilin shook his head. If he wanted to capture the emperor, the palace would turn into ruins. This was something that had been tested before. If you want to enter the palace, there might be someone who can help, Aisha said. Who? Staya asked. The third prince, Liu, Aisha said. You should have met before. Why do you say that? Jilin was curious. According to legends, unlike the other princes who lived in the palace or had their own mansions, the third prince, Liu, had a falling out with the emperor a few years ago for some reason. He rushed out of the palace in a fit of anger. But because of this, he didn't have much power in the Middle Empire, and the royal family of the Middle Empire had a tradition of fighting within the same family. In order to protect himself, the third prince showed his true feelings to his brothers and stayed in the brothel all year round to wear down his will. The other princes saw that the third prince really didn't want the throne, and they were brothers after all, so they just let him be. Although he had a falling out with the emperor, he didn't do anything serious. After all, he is the third prince of the emperor, and no one dares to offend him in the capital, Aisha said. That's right. Some people also said that because the third prince stayed in the brothel all year round, he met some shady people. Those people thought that the prince had a strong backing, so they all tried to please him. When the third prince was disheartened, he didn't reject any of them. Over the years, it was said that all the underground forces in the capital were under the control of the third prince, Staya said. Sti said, Of course, in the eyes of the imperial family, this is actually a self-destructive thing. So, there was a brothel in the capital that was open during the day, Spring Breeze Brothel, Aisha said. So it was him. Jilin nodded and said, He was a good person. He even paid for my drinks and gave me 2 pieces of gold. Chapter 88. Why did he pay for your drinks? Aisha asked. Because he said that he felt like old friends at first sight, right? Jilin said confidently. After saying that, he even raised his head to look at Staya. Staya nodded in disgust. No, why didn't you pay for yourself? Aisha asked. Because I don't have money. Jilin was a little anxious. Aisha did not understand why Jilin's mood suddenly changed, but she did not care. She never understood the temperament of the Megalosaurus. The distance between humans and the Megalosaurus was far greater than any huge canyon in the world. It was not something that humans could understand. However, that was not the main point. What Jilin said was too absurd. You don't have money. Aisha suddenly slammed the table and stood up. Her voice changed. Your money can support your real body. It's a mountain of gold without any exaggeration. Jilin thought seriously for a while. He felt that his statement was not very accurate. So he changed his words. I didn't bring it. You didn't bring it? I told you to bring money when you first came out. You are such a money-loving person. How could you forget to bring it? Aisha looked at Jilin and said, You did it on purpose? Yes. Jilin nodded. It's natural to spend money to buy things. Equivalent exchange. No gains without pains. Isn't that what you as a dragon agree on? Aisha said. It was the fundamental principle that the witches believed in. This is the natural order of the human race. I don't need to abide by it. Moreover, it's the human race who wants to plunder the treasures of the dragon clan that's even more treacherous. Jilin crossed his arms in front of his chest and said righteously. What happened? Aisha asked. Suddenly, Aisha remembered what Jilin said about the promise of humans in the Battle of Snowfire. Who said something to you? Indeed, there was a person who told me that all wealth is saved. I think it makes sense. Jilin nodded and said. Aisha and Staya both turned their heads to Bane, who was still lying on the table. Aisha leaned over the table and lifted Bane up with one hand. She shook him back and forth. Wake up. Wake up. I don't want to drink anymore. I don't want to drink anymore. I was wrong, Bane said in a daze. His voice contained endless fear. "Wake up." Aisha shook Bane's head back and forth. "I don't want you to drink anymore. I want to ask you something." Go ahead." Bane only dared to wake up when he heard Aisha say that he didn't want to drink anymore. His acting was so bad that it made people speechless. "So, did you tell him that all the wealth is saved?" Aisha asked. "Who?" Bane just woke up and didn't know what was going on. "Him." Aisha pointed at Jilin. "No, absolutely not. Besides, how could I say something like that? The person who can say something like that must have a lot of wealth, right? I don't have any." Bane shook his head and firmly denied it. He already knew how bad and serious the consequences of talking nonsense with Jilin would be. Who else could it be? Aisha didn't believe it at all. Moreover, she had evidence. Only the three of us can say something like that to him. Aisha suddenly stopped halfway because she suddenly realized that it was no longer the time to go to the Snow Wind Empire. There was one more person who could talk to Jilin, and, as Bane said, that person obviously had a lot of wealth. Indeed, it wasn't him who said that. Sure enough, Jilin answered. Aisha threw Bane back on the chair and quietly looked at Jilin. She really couldn't see through him. Wasteland, south of the southern Exine Empire. This was an endless wasteland. As far as the eye could see, there were only endless stones. It was shrouded in sand all day long. If a human didn't have any protective measures or an extremely tyrannical body, they would become very fragile. The violent sandstorm and small rocks could easily cause an unlucky human to lose his precious life. Therefore, this place was deserted. But this wasn't the fundamental reason. Just like Jilin's greed for treasures, humans also had the same passion for land. This degree of harsh environment couldn't stop humans from opening up the world. Changing the natural environment was an important means of survival for humans, and they were very familiar with it. Some people in the southern Exine Empire once said that if a dense forest was planted in the wasteland to protect against the sandstorm, and then the land was treated for a few years, perhaps the southern Exine Empire would have a large territory. But this plan was just an idea. The real thing that stopped humans was a group of beastmen living in the south of the wasteland. They were burly and majestic. They had infinite strength. They were bloodthirsty. They were born good at fighting. They were numerous, and they ate people. The beastmen were the masters of this wasteland, the destined masters, because they were obviously more adapted to the environment here. They were more suitable than humans, and more suitable than humans. Humans always said that the fittest would survive. This adaptation could be humans adapting to the environment, and it could also be the environment adapting to humans. The scary thing was that once they adapted to the human environment, they wouldn't adapt to any other creatures except humans. The transformation of the environment by humans was the complete destruction of the original ecological environment, destroying the living environment of other creatures just for their own living environment. Just from this point alone, humans were extremely selfish. But humans never thought so. They thought that the world should belong to them after the gods left. Humans thought that they were the only masters of the world, and they thought very highly of themselves. They didn't care about anyone else. Humans said that all things were born to nurture humans, but humans had nothing to repay the heavens. Jilin felt very angry. The arrogance of humans was enough to make him angry. The meaning of this sentence was very obvious. All creatures except humans were covered in one sentence. All things were used to nurture humans, and the only thing that had a higher status than humans and wasn't included in the list of all things was the heavens. Jilin felt that it was very funny. All things were born to nurture humans, but humans had nothing to repay the heavens. You said it as if you were ashamed. If you could see it so clearly and feel so ashamed, why didn't you just die? Was this what humans often said when they used the most cowardly tone and said the most arrogant words? Humans would call the heavy casualties of humans a calamity and ignore the extinction of other creatures. Only humans would call the extinction of humans the end of the world, but they never thought that once there were no humans in the world, the other creatures would have a much better life than they were now. All things were recovering and thriving. How could it be called the end of the world? But humans would never think of this obvious problem. Because in the eyes of humans, what were those? All things. They were just barbarians, beasts. If there was, there was. If there wasn't, there wasn't. It didn't matter. Jilin, who had traveled to 2 human empires, had a deep understanding of this. But Jilin, as the noblest creature, was originally high up in the sky. These things had nothing to do with him. He should be like what humans imagined, flying above the 9 heavens and coldly looking at the changes in the world below. He should be neither sad nor happy, and he shouldn't come and go. But Staya told him that humans couldn't just be a pure spectator in their life, or else they would have lived in vain. The greater the power, the greater the responsibility. This famous saying was widespread, and it wasn't without reason. Therefore, a real man should take the world as his own responsibility and save the people from the fire and water. He should worry about the worries of the world first, and enjoy the pleasures of the world later. If one was high up in the temple, he would worry about the people. If one was far away, he would worry about the emperor. Jilin said, "Wasn't it too miserable to live like this?" Staya also said that a saint in the Middle Empire once said, "If you can build thousands of houses, a large number of people in the world will be happy. It's enough to break your house and freeze to death." The wise man has passed away, but he left a beautiful jade in front of you, and the future generations should follow his example. Jilin said again, "You're a princess of the Saimai Empire. Why do you always talk about the Middle Empire? Don't tell me I was in a hurry and caught the wrong person." Staya said, "Human culture doesn't discriminate between countries." Jilin said, "Don't lie to me. Which one of those wise men you mentioned had a happy old age? It was all because they offended others, because they worried about the people. In the end, each of them had a miserable life. What about the people they worried about? Why didn't they help them? Why did they let the saints live in a broken, thatched house with holes on all sides? The neighbor's children even picked up the thatch that was blown away by the wind on the saints' roofs." Staya said, "So to be a saint, you have to not be happy with external things and not be sad for yourself." Some saints said, "If you don't know the heat but don't feel it, aren't you a gentleman?" Some saints said, "If you care about the goodness in your heart, you won't regret it even if you die 9 times." Jilin's last sentence sounded quite magnanimous. After a lesson, Jilin still did not admit defeat. However, he had to admit that Staya was really eloquent and very persuasive when she was telling him these things, because there were so many human sages behind her, providing her with endless power. She was able to make a megalosaurus speechless. Those sages, in Jilin's eyes, were like how humans looked at the sky and all things. Those people could never be classified as human. When his house was leaking rain everywhere, he was actually thinking about breaking the world apart. Shouldn't a normal person be thinking about how to fix their house? When they were framed by their political enemies, denounced by the emperor, and suffered setbacks in their career, they didn't think about how to make a comeback. Instead, they worried about their emperor. Could such people still be considered human? If they didn't die, he really hoped to meet them. For the first time, Jilin felt sorry for the death of humans. After a long period of brainwashing by Staya using the human sages, Jilin decided to do something. Jilin felt that the humans were going overboard and decided to teach them a lesson. Staya had said that going too far was as bad as not going far enough. The humans' territory was too big now, and the other races were still dissatisfied. If this continued, it would definitely be a path to disaster. Jilin felt that the humans giving up half of their territory was just right, taking the world as their responsibility and saving the world from disaster. The dwarves were also part of the world, and the orcs were also part of the world. Thus, there were 2 figures wearing the same kind of cloak as Mu Xian as they traveled through the sandstorm. The sandstorm lifted the hat of one of them because he didn't walk with his head lowered like the others. Instead, he walked forward with his back straight. The sandstorm took the opportunity to hit his face. If it was a normal person, their cheeks would have hurt. If they were unlucky, they might even be injured. However, this person didn't feel it at all. It was as if the sandstorm was no different from the spring breeze, because he had red hair and a pair of golden eyes. Chapter 89. The Dwarf King saw that Jilin's had been blown off by the wind, but he did not remind him. He just pulled his own hat lower. What a joke. He was a megalosaurus. What was this wind and sand to him? He must have been hit by stones. Jilin must have been inadvertently struck by lightning when he was flying in the sky. The Dwarf King thought mischievously. This journey was also very novel for the Dwarf King. Although he was also a 9th-ranked diamond ranker, he had never walked such a long way or done such a big thing with only one person accompanying him. Now that so many dwarves had been moved into the Red Dragon Palace, the original scale was somewhat insufficient. The dwarves could only do their best to build an underground kingdom. Everyone was very busy. In the entire Dwarf Kingdom, the Dwarf King was probably the only one who had nothing to do. He really could not spare anyone to accompany the Dwarf King and visit the orc tribe so far away. Moreover, with such an unreasonable existence like Jilin traveling with the Dwarf King, all the dwarves were very relieved. The dwarves even thought that with Jilin by his side, the Dwarf King could even swagger in front of the orc leader and spit in his face. It would not be a problem even if he swaggered out. From the Red Dragon Palace in the west of the Saimai Empire to the wilderness in the south of the Nanshin Empire, the distance was longer than crossing a human empire. The mountains were high, the water was far, and the road was difficult and dangerous. However, with Jilin as his companion, this was not a problem. Apart from the fact that the wind in the sky was a little too strong and the lightning that flashed from time to time was frightening. Furthermore, flying at such a high speed in the sky was not a good experience for any normal creature. Thinking of this, the Dwarf King could not help but shake his head. He pulled his robe a little tighter and finally could not help but say, "Even if I said that all my wealth was saved, you don't have to do this, right? These 2 clothes are not worth much. Do you have to do this? Do you have to steal them? Who are you and I? You are a dignified megalosaurus, a godlike creature. It's fine if you don't hesitate to lower your status, but I am also the king of a country. If this matter is spread out, it will be a disgrace to the country." I think you were right. If you didn't say it, I wouldn't have found out. Why would I spend money to buy things according to the rules of humans? I really don't know what it means. Jilin said and shook his head. He seemed to be annoyed by his previous behavior of spending. It was originally. He had never heard that money that went into the dragon's nest go out. This time, he might have really embarrassed the dragon race. Fortunately, there were no dragons in this world other than himself. No other dragons knew about it. Then won't you disgrace the dragon race by stealing? The Dwarf King could tell what Jilin was thinking at a glance and couldn't help but say, "Stealing is not a shameful thing in the dragon race." Jilin said to the Dwarf King with a serious face. When the ancestor of the dragon race, the Black Dragon King, rushed out of hell, he stole a pair of wings that the Lord of Hell, Satan, had taken himself. Since then, the Black Dragon King had 2 pairs of wings, a pair of dragon wings and a pair of wings. He flew faster than any dragon. This matter is known to all dragons in the dragon race, and the entire dragon race is proud of it. Now, as long as a dragon can pass through the barrier of hell, they will try to steal the remaining 2 pairs of wings of Satan, but no dragon has succeeded. For the first time, I feel that Satan is so pitiful. Not only does he have to fight against the divine court, but he also has to guard against the dragon race stealing his wings every day. The Dwarf King didn't know what to say. If he didn't take the wings himself, no one could steal them. Jilin shook his head and said, since he took them himself, it means that he didn't want them himself. So in the end, he was really annoyed by my ancestors and gave them to the dragon race. So, the Dwarf King asked in confusion. So, stealing is not a shameful thing in the dragon race. Jilin repeated his words word for word. The Dwarf King couldn't help but slap his forehead with his hand. Now he understood what it meant to want to cry, but have no tears. How could these 2 things be compared? What did the Black Dragon King steal? In hell, he stole the wings of the Lord of Hell. It was not an exaggeration to call this kind of thing a feat. As a mortal, he was very fascinated and excited by it. It was not surprising that the dragon race was proud of it. Look at you, stealing 2 robes from a human tailor. I feel ashamed for you, the Dwarf King said in his heart. Actually, I don't want to steal, Jilin suddenly said seriously. It's just that I feel that if I don't steal, the human might die. The Dwarf King was completely confused. Was this human language? Although you are not human at all. According to my understanding of the human race, if I ask directly, he probably won't give it to me. Jilin was a little uncertain. That's for sure. The Dwarf King helped him confirm. There's still a 40% chance that he will hit me. Jilin said. That's too little. The Dwarf King said. Then there's a 90% chance that he will die. Jilin said. Why is there still a 10% chance? The Dwarf King felt that if Jilin attacked a human, the human's chance of survival would not be more than 10%, or it could be said that it was very small. It's a 90% chance of survival. Jilin said, What the hell? The Dwarf King was flustered and exasperated, almost cursing out loud. However, Jilin, you said that it's not easy for him to do business. You can't let him take the risk of losing everything or even having a slim chance of survival just to buy clothes, right? It's not a good deal. The Dwarf King tried to persuade him with kind words. However, I feel that what you said makes a lot of sense. Jilin scratched his red hair and said. The Dwarf King regretted hearing this. He didn't mean what he said at all, since the dwarves came to the Red Dragon Palace. In addition to building the underground kingdom, they didn't give up their old profession of forging. Because of a contract with the Dwarf King, Jilin, with the cooperation of Aisha and the dwarves, specially made a flame device that could adjust the temperature of the flame. The highest temperature was enough to melt any metal known to the dwarves. The bottleneck of forging that had suppressed the dwarves for thousands of years no longer existed. The ores that they didn't even dare to think about before could now be used. The designs that only existed in the imagination before could now be realized. One could imagine what kind of enthusiasm the dwarves would burst out. It was like a volcano that had been suppressed for countless years suddenly erupting. Countless dwarven masters experimented day and night to complete their once genius ideas. This also caused the dwarves' ores that had been stored for countless years to decrease at an alarming rate. Finally, the Dwarf King couldn't bear it any longer and said this to the dwarf grandmasters, hoping that they could save some ores. However, he didn't expect that this sentence would be heard by Jilin, who had a new and unique understanding of it. The Dwarf King rubbed his aching eyebrows. Only then did he understand why Staya, Aisha, and Jilin were always a little careful when talking to each other. Although Jilin was powerful in the eyes of the dragons, he was still an underage child. His behavior and way of doing things had not been fixed yet. It was indeed a bit exaggerated to say that he was as pure as a piece of white paper. However, the close and complicated humans around him could easily draw a line on this piece of paper inadvertently and change the picture on this piece of paper. Staya obviously wanted to draw a blazing sun on this piece of paper, which represented all the positive thoughts of humans. However, the solar energy couldn't be drawn on this piece of paper. It was hard to say what the effect would be if she drew it on this piece of paper, and where she drew it now. Bane, a young human, indeed didn't realize this kind of thing, but he also inadvertently drew countless people on this piece of paper. Some were fearless of death, some were loyal, some were greedy and lustful, and some were treacherous. The effects were both good and bad. As for Aisha, who had spent the most time with Jilin, the color she drew on this piece of paper was the faintest trace. Although it was not obvious, the range of the color she drew on this piece of paper was the largest, and the impact was also the deepest. It was a fog that covered the whole piece of paper. It was enough to change the color of the sun, and it made people unable to see it clearly. It was very characteristic of witches. The Knights of Light's thoughts of justice, responsibility, and concern for the country and the people through the layer of fog of witches made Jilin come up with an idea to unite all the races and occupy half of the human world. Who is it? How dare you come to this place? A loud shout interrupted the Dwarf King's thoughts. The Dwarf King looked up and saw a creature with a wolf's head, a body of more than 2 meters, bulging muscles, wearing a yellow cloth, and holding a huge machete in his hand, standing in front of him. He scanned his surroundings and realized that the two of them had been surrounded by orcs who had appeared out of nowhere. The orcs were indeed the masters of this wasteland. If they wanted to hide, it was really difficult for outsiders to find them. Looking at Jilin's expression, who was too lazy to even lift his eyelids, the Dwarf King knew that he had already found them. He just didn't think it was worth mentioning, so he didn't tell the Dwarf King, but the Dwarf King was distracted. He calculated a little in his heart, and indeed, they were almost at the front line of the orcs' tribe. How do you want to contact the orcs? The Dwarf King asked in a low voice. It's simple, Jilin said. Didn't you say that the orcs respect the strong? Find the strongest one, kill him, and then there will be stronger ones. Sooner or later, the leader of the orcs will come to me. No, the Dwarf King shook his head and said, this method is too rough. One mistake, and there may be heavy casualties. These people will be your people in the future. How can this be? Let me do it. That's fine. Jilin nodded, happy to be free. Seeing that Jilin agreed, the Dwarf King took out a sword from behind his back and slowly pulled it out. The Dwarf King's sword, needless to say, was definitely a peerless sword. The sound of the sword being pulled out was like the roar of a tiger and the roar of a dragon, accompanied by wind and thunder. The blade of the sword was as smooth as a water mirror, but if one looked closely, there were thousands of layers of ripples. The leader of the werewolves howled and charged forward. Although he didn't know why the dwarves and humans suddenly appeared in his territory, there was nothing to say since the other party had already pulled out his sword. The rest of the werewolves also attacked from different directions. Wolves had always been pack animals. Chapter 90. The average height of the werewolves was more than 2 meters, and the leader was more than 2.5 meters. The height of the dwarves was generally only about 1 meter, and the Dwarf King was no exception. He was only a little more than 1 meter tall. The difference in size between the two would bring a strong visual impact to others. If one only looked at it from an alien perspective, there was no suspense in this battle. This was simply a rare strong man bullying a 7 or 8-year-old child. However, the people of the whole continent would not treat the dwarves as children. Although they were short, they were very strong. Their intelligence was not high, but they could make the best weapons in the world. Therefore, the werewolf leader did not make any mistakes of underestimating the enemy. He rushed to the front of the Dwarf King and used all his strength to slash down with the scimitar in his hand. A silver light appeared on the scimitar. It was the werewolf's signature skill, Full Moon Slash. The huge height advantage made this strike full of power, as if Mount Tai was pressing down with a thunderous force. The Dwarf King's expression did not change. He just blocked the sword in his hand above his head, waiting for the opponent to slash down. A trace of surprise flashed in the werewolf leader's eyes. This was very strange. The dwarves had a clear height disadvantage when facing any race. When other races attacked the dwarves, the first strike was definitely to slash down. Because it was best to use force, it was easiest to gain an advantage. Over the years, the dwarves also had their own countermeasures, that was to block or dodge and then attack the opponent's lower body. This made the enemy panic and turned the disadvantage into an advantage. At one time, it had made all races panic. The werewolf leader was naturally prepared, but when he saw that the enemy was prepared to defend and was only waiting for him to slash down, although he felt strange, this was his full blow after all, and there was no way to change it. The werewolf leader's scimitar successfully slashed down and passed through the sword in the hand of the Dwarf King. The full moon slash drew out half a crescent. The werewolf leader did not even feel any obstruction, nor did he feel like he was slashing anything. Just when he was surprised, he suddenly felt his hand lighten. He looked down and saw that the scimitar in his hand was gone. When he raised his head again, he saw that the broken sword was stuck in the sand behind the Dwarf King. The Dwarf King smiled slightly. He raised the sword in his hand, and the tip of the sword was firmly placed on the werewolf leader's throat. He smiled and said, "Don't move." This sentence was obviously directed at the rest of the werewolves. The surrounding werewolves who were still charging immediately stopped themselves. They didn't even see what had happened. They only saw that their leader had been subdued by the dwarf. They also saw that the sword that their leader usually treasured more than his wife had been miserably broken. That's right. Why fight with a dwarf with a sword? I'm impressed, said the werewolf leader. His expression looked like Jilin's signature expression. No objections, the dwarf king asked with a smile. If a human defeated me with such a good sword, I might not be convinced, said the werewolf leader. But since it's a dwarf, I have nothing to say. I've lost. What do you want? You're a good man. The dwarf king smiled as he slowly sheathed his sword. The sound of the sword being sheathed was equally pleasing to the ear. The werewolf leader couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. On one hand, he was relieved that the sword on his neck had been taken away. On the other hand, it was because the dwarf king's sword was too good. Why didn't you kill me? The werewolf leader asked. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to do business, said the dwarf king. As soon as he heard the dwarf king's words, the werewolf leader's face lit up with joy. His whole body lay down, just to be able to look at the dwarf as an equal. His bloody mouth really cracked open to the roots of his ears, revealing a mouth full of bloody fangs. Although he looked fierce, the dwarf king could feel that the other party was slowly releasing goodwill. Why are you so happy? Asked the dwarf king, puzzled. Dwarf brother, do you still need me to say it? If you had said earlier that you were here to do business, I would have led my brothers to carry you into the tribe. You didn't even have to walk one more step. It's so far away. Dwarf brother can't tolerate it. The werewolf leader said loudly and exaggeratedly. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. The surrounding werewolves had already gathered around and echoed. Jilin looked at the wagging tails behind them. He felt that it wasn't a dozen wolves standing beside him, but a dozen dogs. Do business? The dwarf king was really confused. At the same time, he was somewhat puzzled. When did the relationship between the dwarves and the orcs become so good? As the dwarf king, he actually didn't know it all. He kept calling the other party dwarf brother. Yes, dwarf brother, don't tease me at this time. You and I are so far apart. Brother, I don't need to tell you that you've traveled from the northernmost to the southernmost. Let's not talk about other things. Just based on this, I admire you. But brother, you can't go so far for no reason. Since you're not here to cause trouble, then you must not be doing well in that group of two-legged sheep. Can't you not come to us to make a living? Don't worry. As long as you come to our tribe, we'll definitely provide you with good food and drink. At that time, we'll definitely let you return with a full load. As the werewolf spoke, he grabbed the dwarf king's arm tightly, as if he was afraid that he would turn around and run away in the next second. Oh, for what you said, you've done business with the dwarves? Asked the dwarf king with interest. Of course. The werewolf leader tried hard to get close to the dwarf king. The dignity of a brave werewolf warrior was thrown aside at this time. What are you selling? Asked the dwarf king. What else can I sell? Dwarf brother, you're really funny. Of course, I'm selling weapons. The werewolf leader said as he handed the forging knife in his hand to the dwarf king. Brother, look, this knife was forged by a dwarf brother I invited to the tribe. When the dwarf king heard this, he took it and looked at it. His brows wrinkled. The dwarf king could see the material of this knife at a glance. It could only be described with 4 words, too horrible to look at. But from the lines, the forging technique was indeed the dwarves' technique. The dwarves were proud of their forging, and the whole world knew this. Under normal circumstances, if you asked the dwarves to forge something for you with a pile of scrap metal, they would be very polite if they didn't beat you up on the spot. What kind of difficulties and helplessness did a dwarf go through to forge a knife with this kind of thing? In the eyes of the dwarf king, the material of this knife couldn't even be called scrap metal. It could only be said to be the waste of forging swords. But when he looked at the design of this knife again, the dwarf king knew that this knife was forged by the dwarf wholeheartedly for the werewolf, and there was no reluctance at all. Although the dwarves would do their best for forging, this did not mean that they would do their best for the people who commissioned them to make swords. A mature dwarf craftsman only needed a glance at the employer's hand to know what kind of design and what size would suit the employer. On the other hand, they could also know what kind of design was most unsuitable for this person. If the dwarf did not want to forge, but it was not easy to refuse, they would forge a work that was not suitable for the employer. At first glance, there was no difference. Maybe it was just a little heavier, maybe the handle was a little longer, or maybe there was an undetectable curve. The employer also knew that this was an excellent weapon, but no matter how he used it, it would be awkward. Others would use it smoothly, but in the end, they would either not use it or give it away. This was an unspoken secret of the dwarf race. The werewolf leader saw that the dwarf king was looking at his broken knife without speaking and was just thinking for a while, so he couldn't help but call out. And the dwarf king came back to his senses. "Brother, look at this saber. I'm sure you don't like it, but to me, this is my lifeblood. I don't even hug my wife when I sleep every night. I hug it. If it's broken, I can't. I'll get you a new one." The dwarf king understood the werewolf's meaning and smiled. "That's not necessary." The werewolf leader actually refused the dwarf king's proposal and said, "You can help me fix it." The dwarf king looked at the werewolf. How could he not understand? This werewolf really regarded this knife as his life, so he didn't want to change it even if he wanted to. "Don't worry, I'll definitely help you fix it better than the original." The dwarf king patted him on the shoulder and said in a deep voice, "Stand up. You still have to take us to your tribe." "Okay." The werewolf stood up and agreed. "Brother, wait here for a moment. I'll go back and find a car to pick you up." "No need." The dwarf king waved his hand and said, "You guys just go forward. We'll follow behind. You guys go as soon as possible. We can keep up." "That's fine. Then I'll have to trouble you." The werewolf leader just thought for a moment and agreed. He was really worried about leaving these two people here alone. What if they disappeared after he left? So, a werewolf team escorted a dwarf and a human all the way to the west with smoke and dust. "See, I told you it was a better idea than yours. If you kill them all, where are we going to find the orc tribe?" The dwarf king whispered to Jilin. As a rank 9 powerhouse, as long as he wanted, even if the werewolves stood face to face in front of him, they couldn't hear what he said, no matter how good their ears were. "It's okay." Jilin nodded. "But isn't it too troublesome? Looking at them, it seems that you have to forge some weapons for them. What are you doing?" "Let's wait and see," the dwarf king said. At this moment, he remembered the werewolf's words about the dwarf, who came from thousands of miles away, put down the pride of the dwarven craftsman, and used waste materials to forge scimitars for the orcs. What could make the dwarf craftsmen give up their pride? The dwarf king was very curious. Chapter 91. Capital, Starry Lake Courtyard. Jilin was sitting on a chair with one hand on the table. His index finger was tapping on the table at a very fast frequency, and the whole room was echoing with this dong 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 sound. This was a new movement that Jilin had learned, and he found it very interesting. The southern wasteland was already on the right track. For some reason, the dwarf king was unanimously welcomed by the entire orc tribe, and the dwarf king was also very strangely willing to condescend and personally forge weapons for those orcs. Everything was very good. In this way, his plan in the southern wasteland would have a very smooth progress. He believed that soon, he would be able to see the supreme leader of the orcs, the Beast King. As long as he could cooperate with the orcs, he would have countless warriors under his command. Moreover, they would be the best warriors, the kind that was countless times better than him. Then, on the side of the Middle Empire, he would obtain the god soul and turn the giant sword in his hand into an artifact. Then, he would be able to smoothly destroy the natural barrier between the volcano and the wilderness. Now, he was still in his infancy. If he wanted to destroy the barrier by himself, he was afraid that he would have to wait for 2,000 years. And, judging from the current situation, the humans should not give him such a long time to sleep peacefully. When he was in the Snow Wind Empire, he didn't do anything. Didn't he just snatch a princess? This group of humans actually found so many people to beat him up. They were really making a fuss over nothing. He didn't do anything to Staya. Besides which, Megalosaurus didn't snatch a princess. After opening the barrier, he could use the excellent equipment made by the dwarves to equip the orc army that was good at fighting. After the orc army made up for their only shortcoming, they would no longer be at a disadvantage when facing the humans. They should be able to easily deal with the most troublesome human wave tactic. And with the support of the dwarves, the Red Dragon Palace would not fall behind in terms of equipment. This way, he would be able to mobilize his army to attack the humans' territory. Just thinking about it was very interesting. It would prevent the humans from gathering a large group of people to attack him. Who knows? Maybe a brave warrior would appear and turn the tide. That would be very interesting. Jilin finally stopped his index finger and nodded with satisfaction. Once again, he thought about his plan and felt that it was really flawless. There was nothing to say. However, the problem was that the Middle Empire gave Jilin the feeling of a dragon devouring the moon, and he didn't know where to start. The situation in the Middle Empire was too complicated, and there was no clue at all. It couldn't be compared to the Beastmen tribes in the southern wasteland, where you could see everything clearly at a glance. Over there, as long as you could give them good weapons, they would welcome you with open arms. But in the Central Empire, you can't get anything done without going around in circles at least 3 times. This was what Bane described to Jilin. After 2 days of shopping in the capital, Bane went crazy and said that he had never seen such a group of people. They didn't do anything serious every day and only talked nonsense. They couldn't get to the point even after talking for half a day. Yet, everyone here seemed to be enjoying themselves. How unreasonable! Staya said that this was the etiquette that the Middle Empire was proud of. They stood on this word and looked down on the other human empires. They used some complicated actions and ways of speaking to distinguish themselves from others. It seemed that the princess of the Saimai Empire didn't like the Middle Empire's attitude of being the boss all day long. Jilin said that it was really ridiculous. Only Aisha smiled and didn't say anything. As an extreme realist, Aisha believed in one principle, and that was that what existed was reasonable. The Middle Empire had followed this principle for thousands of years and hadn't been replaced. Naturally, it had its reasons. Aisha had lived in the Middle Empire for a period of time. She deeply understood the benefits, importance, and meaning of etiquette. However, she was too lazy to talk to this group of people. This problem couldn't be explained in a few words. Jilin wanted to go out for a walk and see the city, but he couldn't stand the suffocating huge crowd during the day. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control himself and ruin his genius plan. He didn't know why, but ever since Jilin came to the city, he wanted to set it on fire. In his imagination, the scene of the whole city burning made his heart throb. Therefore, Jilin decided to go out in the dead of night. However, the people in the capital didn't go to work at sunrise and rest at sunset. At night, the people on Vermilion Bird Avenue were more lively than during the day. When Jilin felt that it was time to go out, it was already after midnight. Jilin walked alone on the bright street, illuminated by the moonlight, while thinking about how to get in touch with the third prince. Aisha's suggestions were either too slow or too expensive. Jilin didn't think it was very good. His suggestion of letting Staya get close to the third prince was also firmly rejected. It was better to let Staya and Aisha dress up as robbers and kidnap the third prince. Then, he would see what was wrong. Jilin seriously pondered about his unspeakable plan. Unconsciously, he walked to the front of Chunfeng, Lu looking up. Jilin had a feeling that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. The whole capital was resting, and there was no sound. Only the street where Chunfeng Lu was located was still bustling with people. Everywhere, there were lanterns and colored banners, and it was very lively. Occasionally, there were pedestrians on the street, but most of them were swaying and staggering. Their faces were flushed, and their mouths were constantly muttering something that even Jilin couldn't understand. However, there were so many people, and there would always be some special people. This was the truth that Jilin knew from the beginning. Therefore, not only were there people who drank too much and didn't know anything, but only wandered on the street. There were also people who came out of a brothel and went into another one. These people usually shouted loudly, "Go this way, go that way," and drink golden wine and write poems. There were also people who spent all their money and refused to leave. They were thrown out by the brothel's thugs in front of the brothel. Even though their faces were bruised and swollen, they didn't feel ashamed. They patted the dirt off their faces, stood up, and laughed at the sky. One must enjoy life to the fullest, and money will come back after it has been spent. Kwame, when I succeed and become famous, I will definitely come find you. On the second floor of the brothel, a beautiful woman stretched her head out. Presumably, she was the Huame that the man spoke of. She bowed to the man downstairs and said with a smile, "Young master is really sincere. I only hope that young master can fulfill his wish as soon as possible. When the time comes, I will be with young master forever. Please don't make me wait." Hearing this, the man laughed 3 times, turned around, and left. He looked indescribably confident. The onlookers who saw this secretly nodded their heads, completely forgetting that this guy was thrown out by someone. Moreover, according to Jilin's guess, the person who asked the thugs to throw this guy out was most likely this Huame. When he saw the woman greet the next guest with a smile, Jilin felt that his guess was not far from the truth. Hypocritical humans. Another group of men came out of the brothel. One of them was already so drunk that he needed 2 or 3 friends to support him before he could walk forward. However, he still gripped the wine glass in his hand tightly and didn't let go. His persistent attitude was admirable. This group of people struggled to support their companions until they walked in front of Jilin. One of the men who was supporting someone saw that Jilin was standing in the middle of the road like a pillar. He didn't even know how to move aside. Just as he was about to open his mouth to say something, the drunk man beat him to it. He raised his head strenuously and glanced at Jilin. Seeing that Jilin didn't look very old, he immediately sneered and said, "What is this young man doing standing here? Did you come out behind your family's back? Are you embarrassed? Haha, come. This old man has nothing on him now. The only valuable thing is the golden cup in my hand. Take it. The man stuffed the wine glass in his hand into Jilin's hand as he spoke. Jilin originally wanted to throw the glass at the drunkard's face and get rid of this bastard on behalf of the human race. However, as soon as the glass entered his hand, Jilin realized that it indeed seemed to be made of pure gold. Thus, for the first time in his life, he made way for a human. Every minute of the spring night is worth 1,000 gold. Don't let the empty wine glass face the moon. Young man, go quickly. Don't waste this great time in moonlight. The drunkard continued to shout. The companions supporting him couldn't help but shake their heads when they saw that Lord Ouyang was so drunk that he gave away his favorite golden cup. However, it didn't stop him. On a windy and moonlit night, when one returned home after enjoying himself to the fullest, he met a young man in front of a brothel and gave him a golden cup as payment for the wine. Among the scholars of the Central Empire, this could definitely be considered a romantic tale of a famous scholar. They just hoped that when Lord Ouyang woke up tomorrow, he wouldn't regret it and feel sorry for him. Jilin looked at the golden cup in his hand. He suddenly didn't have the urge to burn down this city. This was the first time he felt that humans were so easily swayed by their emotions. Every single one of them, who was busy with daily necessities or buried in documents, only needed to drink a few cups in a brothel, and they would all become immortals of poetry. They drank until they were unconscious and still held on tightly to the wine glass. Just like that, they casually gave it to an unfamiliar young man on the side of the road. Humans, their mentality could change completely in an instant. Jilin glanced at the demons dancing wildly on the street. He couldn't help but say in his heart, "You're all drunk if you know, but those who don't would think that you're all of the Li family's bloodline." Jilin chuckled. He felt that the existence of humans in this world added a bit of brilliance. It only added to the other creatures' frustrations. Jilin weighed the golden cup in his hand. He didn't put it away. He just held it up and walked forward slowly. A young man holding an incomparably gorgeous golden wine glass and walking on this flower street, as if there was no one around him, would always attract a few extra glances. A waiter at the door saw Jilin walking towards a shop with a dazzling golden wine glass from afar. He rolled his eyes and became mischievous. He turned around and walked into the shop. He took out a jug of wine and walked to Jilin's side. He filled the golden cup to the brim. Jilin didn't stop walking. He allowed the waiter to pour wine into the cup. He smiled at the waiter and raised his head to drink the wine in the cup. The waiter followed Jilin. When Jilin drank a cup, he would pour another cup. When he poured another cup, Jilin would drink another cup, until he finished the wine in the waiter's hand. Jilin's footsteps didn't stop. He didn't even change his pace. A young master from a wealthy family inadvertently saw this strange scene on the second floor. He thought it was a sensationalist and smiled disdainfully. He said to the waiter beside him, "Bring down a jug of double-steamed wine." "Yes." The waiter beside him grinned. He thought to himself that this wasn't a good way to become famous in the capital, because the wine on this street could drown people alive. The waiter took a jug of wine and walked to Jilin's side. He asked softly, "Brother, this is the strongest double-steamed wine. Can you drink it? If you can't, then quickly go home. You are too eye-catching on this street." When Jilin heard the word double-steamed wine, his eyes almost turned golden. He looked at the waiter in a friendly manner. The waiter understood when he saw Jilin's eyes. He could only sigh. This young man didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He raised the jug above his head and walked around. He said loudly to the surrounding people, "Young Master Wang Jiayong invites this young master to double-steamed wine." He was telling the crowd who invited Jilin to drink what wine. The waiter looked at Jilin with admiration as he drank one cup after another. Only today did he know what it meant to not refuse anyone. He drank the wine when it was served. After the waiter finished pouring the wine, another waiter immediately took over the jug. Just like the waiter, he showed the wine to the crowd and said loudly, "Young Master Zhao Jue invites this young master to a jug of pear blossom wine." Since Jilin's double-steamed wine was halfway through, there were many onlookers. After the manservant finished shouting, there was a burst of cheers. Another world-famous characteristic of the Middle Empire was that they didn't mind watching a show. The waiter returned to Wang Yong's side. Wang Yong immediately said, "Finished drinking?" "Yes." "Bring down another jug." Young Master Zhao has finished." "Then prepare a jug and wait." "Okay." Just as he finished speaking, someone shouted from outside, "Bright Moon Hotel's top courtesan, Miss Gongsun invites this young master to a jug of green wine." Wang Yong glared angrily. The waiter quickly went to prepare. Starting from Jilin's fifth jug of wine, every time he drank a cup, the entire street would be filled with the word "good." The entire red light district was watching. This was much more interesting than drinking alone and hugging a girl. "Young master, this guy is indeed extraordinary," Zhao Qi said as he looked at the young man who was drinking without stopping. "Yes, amazing. It was not in vain for me to wake up in the middle of the night to see him." Third young master nodded his head repeatedly and tapped his palm with his fan. His joy was evident in his words. "Drinking 300 cups in one go, I've seen it for myself today. You can actually kill one person in 10 steps with just a drink. You got the feeling of not being able to travel 1,000 miles. Young master, you don't say. Now that you mention it, this kid really does look like something," Zhao Qi said. "That's right. No matter who it is, as long as they seriously read the great works of the immortal poet, it's inevitable that they will be affected by some unrestrained feeling. Above all, only wine can stimulate this unrestrained feeling." The third prince sighed. Even after 1,000 years, he can still make people feel as if they are his face. The old ancestor's spirit is fascinating. Zhao Qi heard this and couldn't help but twitch his mouth. The immortal poet Li and the Li of the Middle Empire's royal family were not the same Li. Only the royal family of the Middle Empire firmly believed in it. "Let's liven things up. Bring a jug of wine down," the third prince said in high spirits. "Okay." Zhao Qi agreed and turned to leave. He had already expected this development and had already ordered someone to prepare the wine. The waiter beside Jilin suggested that Jilin directly change to a jug. Otherwise, it would be bad if he drank and tired the people who were watching the fun. However, Jilin refused. He liked this cup very much. It seemed that he couldn't do what he wanted to do today. How could he get close to the third prince like this? Moreover, the jug of wine seemed to be given by this guy. Forget it. Jilin shook his head and thought. Thus, Jilin walked back and forth on this red light district 3 times, until the east was bright. Chapter 92. The next day, in the capital, in a roadside restaurant that sold breakfast. Aya, so it's Brother Sue. Long time no see. I missed you so much. Come sit over here. Oh, it's Brother Wang. How have you been? I'm doing fine. How is Brother Wong? I haven't seen you in the red light district recently. Could it be that your wife is still so strict with you? Sigh. Don't mention it. Yeah. Speaking of the red light district, I heard that a slut appeared in the red light district yesterday. I wonder if the rumors are true. I was just about to tell Brother Wong about this. I was in the red light district last night. I saw it with my own eyes. Oh, tell me. In the golden hall of the Imperial Palace, Lord Ouyang tucked his hands into the sleeves of his official robe. He lowered his head and pondered without saying a word. Although it was already late April, it was still slightly cold. Although the spring breeze was chilly, it didn't manage to wake Lord Ouyang from his drunkenness yesterday. Instead, it made Lord Ouyang's head hurt even more. How much did I drink yesterday? How could I give away the golden cup? Official Ouyang was secretly distressed. There was no way he could tell others about this. Since he had already given it away, it was useless even if he was reluctant to part with it. Since that was the case, he could only pretend to be carefree and open-minded. He couldn't lose the cup again and let others look down on him. Lord Ouyang, congratulations. Just as Lord Ouyang was comforting himself, a voice sounded from the side. Lord Ouyang turned his head to look. A man in red official robes, who didn't seem to be more than 30 years old, was cupping his hands and talking to him. He was one of the people who sent him home yesterday. Lord Yang, may I ask what this old man is so happy about getting drunk? Lord Ouyang spoke in a muffled voice. It was obvious that the fire in his heart hadn't been suppressed. Does Lord Yang not know? Lord Yang asked curiously. Right now, the entire capital is saying that the Lord Ouyang gave a sword to a hero. It's a story that will last for eternity. Oh, Lord Ouyang's interest was piqued. Tell me, such conversations rang out in the capital from time to time. In less than half a day, everyone in the capital knew that a legendary figure had appeared in the red light district yesterday. Yesterday, Jilin had walked around the red light district 3 times. When he saw that the sun was about to rise, he returned to the Starry Tiger courtyard. Aisha and the other 2 didn't go out, so they didn't know that Jilin had become famous again. Therefore, the 4 of them discussed how to integrate into the Middle Empire and how to get in touch with the Qinquan formation. According to Aisha, the Qinquan formation might be related to the Middle Empire's Imperial Jade Seal. Aisha said that since the Great Qinquan formation was already confirmed to be underground, why don't we just dig down directly? Once we come into contact with the formation, we will naturally have a clue. Aisha was very confident in formations. Staya disagreed. She felt that once the Qinquan Grand Array came into contact with it, something would happen. No matter what, it was too risky to just dig down rashly. Moreover, she thought that the Witch's magic formation and the Middle Empire's formation were not the same thing. She had never heard of the Witch's magic formation having something like a formation eye. Aisha said that as long as it was a formation, there was nothing that she couldn't understand. They were all formations, so they should be similar. Staya strongly disagreed, but Aisha stubbornly insisted, until Bane suggested that they should secretly steal the Imperial Jade Seal. This meaningless discussion finally came to an end. Everyone shook their heads and left. Even Jilin, who saw humans as ants, thought that instead of stealing the Imperial Jade Seal from the palace, it would be better for him to directly blow up the capital and then search through the ruins bit by bit. It would save him a lot of trouble. Stealing the Imperial Jade Seal from the Imperial Palace would be as difficult as destroying the entire country. Seeing that there was no clue about this matter, Jilin decided to go out for a walk. Yesterday, someone gave him a golden cup when he went out for a walk. Everyone on the street invited him to drink. Who knew what surprises he would encounter when he went out for a walk today? Yesterday, he went to the red light district, so today, Jilin went to the street behind the red light district. Compared to the extremely luxurious red light district, which was filled with tall buildings and dim lights, this street was much more ordinary and plain. Most of the streets were just some small merchants and peddlers hawking their wares on the street. Everyone seemed very busy. Therefore, no one had the time to give Jilin gifts or invite Jilin to drink. So Jilin was a little disappointed. Jilin casually walked on the street, and, at the same time, he felt the surge of energy underground. Every road in the capital was a line of the underground formation. Jilin used his intuition and strolled for a while. Suddenly, he felt something. Jilin raised his head and saw that it was a shop that sold cloth. It looked very ordinary and mediocre. Jilin looked around and realized why he felt something was strange. Because there were always people wandering around this cloth shop. They didn't stop, but they didn't leave. They only stared at this cloth shop. They did it very covertly, but they couldn't escape Jilin's fiery golden eyes. Jilin stood in the same place for a while and realized something even stranger. These people didn't seem to have any bad intentions. When they saw that the shop had no business for a long time, someone would come out and buy 2 bolts of cloth and leave. He carried the 2 bolts of cloth and left. Not long after, another person would take his place. Jilin looked at this strange scene, but he didn't notice. No, he didn't care that the passers-by were also looking at him. A youth standing at the entrance of the cloth shop, looking at the crowd without moving for 6 to 8 hours, was also very eye-catching. "Young master, you've been here for a long time." The owner of the cloth shop was a young and delicate lady. According to human terms, she could be considered a beauty. When she saw Jilin standing at the entrance of her shop for so long, she couldn't help but come out and say this. What she meant was that if you came to buy something, you should buy it quickly. If you didn't, you should leave quickly. Don't disturb other people's business. Jilin obviously couldn't hear the hidden meaning of the human's words. Hearing this human say this, he felt that a few hours had passed. However, this was normal. As a member of the dragon race, Jilin could sleep for tens of years. He really couldn't be expected to have a sense of time. A few hours to Jilin was really just a snap of the fingers. Perhaps it was just a moment of absent-mindedness. Jilin saw that there was nothing wrong, so he shook his head and continued to walk forward. He didn't speak to the lady boss. "Stop." Jilin had only taken a few steps when he heard someone speak. However, Jilin didn't think that this person was talking to him until the person was in front of him, blocking his way. "It's you," Jilin said as he raised his head. "Why do you always talk with your head raised?" Zhao Qi asked somewhat angrily. He had been in the capital for so many years. What kind of people had he not seen? However, it was the first time he saw someone who looked at people with their nostrils like this. Normally, 7th grandfather Zhao would have already beaten that person to the ground and groaned. "I'm used to it." Jilin still raised his head and looked down. "You?" The veins on Zhao Qi's forehead bulged. "You've been standing in front of that cloth shop for a long time." "I'm just looking around," Jilin said. "The 3rd prince asked me to come over and invite you." Jilin thought that he had finally reached the main point. If it wasn't for this sentence, who would have the patience to say these words to you? Zhao Qi had never seen such an arrogant person. The 3rd prince was still waiting for Jilin on the 3rd floor of Spring Breeze House. As soon as Jilin and Zhao Qi entered the door, the 3rd prince greeted them and said with great enthusiasm, "Brother, we are honored by your presence. Your presence brings light to my humble dwelling." The 3rd prince. Jilin stared at the 3rd prince and said without beating around the bush. The temperature of the entire space seemed to have dropped with Jilin's words. Zhao Qi's face was so gloomy that it could drip water. Now that the 3rd prince was too close to Jilin, he could make things difficult for him. However, the 3rd prince didn't care at all. He smiled and said, "Brother, this is the first time you came to the capital. In such a short time, you have gained such a big reputation. Drinking at night on the red light street, 3 turns without getting drunk. This has spread throughout the capital. Brother's charisma is fascinating. Now, in just a few days, you have found out the ins and outs of this one. You really aren't an ordinary person." The 3rd prince wasn't surprised that Jilin knew his identity. This was something that everyone in the capital knew. "Why are you looking for me?" Jilin ignored the 3rd prince and asked directly, "I don't know brother's name." The 3rd prince saw that Jilin was chatting like this and wasn't afraid. At worst, they could just talk about their own things. "My surname is long," Jilin thought for a moment and said. "Hee, this surname is very rare," the 3rd prince said with gritted teeth. Even someone as gentle as him couldn't help but get angry. Jilin's appearance was obviously made up on the spot. He even made it up so ridiculously. Their royal family claimed to be of the dragon bloodline. In the end, this person said that his surname was Long. It's okay. Jilin was very proud of his wit. That's good, Brother Long. The third prince gritted his teeth and swallowed his anger. He didn't intend to ask for the name anymore since it was made up on the spot. Dare I ask, Brother Long, why did you stand in front of that small cloth store for 4 to 5 hours? You even care about this? Jilin said playfully. Why would a prince of such a big empire care so much about a small store? Even I don't think it makes sense. This one is no longer a prince. Don't tell me Brother Long doesn't know. The third prince said, No, I don't want to hide it from Brother Long. The reason why this one stays in Chunfeng restaurant every day is because of this cloth store. The third prince said as he led Jilin to a window. Jilin poked his head out and looked down. What he saw was a cloth store just now. Looking down at the cloth store from this window, the location was really a match made in heaven. Other than the innermost shadow of the cloth store, the rest of the place could be seen at a glance. What about those people around? Jilin asked. Brother Long is really good. This one thought that these people were very hidden, but I didn't expect Brother Long to find them. The third prince said with a smile. That's right, those are my people. Chapter 93. Jilin looked at the third prince and shook his head. His eyes were obviously looking at trash. The third young master had never been looked at like this in his entire life. For a moment, he didn't quite understand what Jilin meant. However, he also felt that something wasn't quite right. Puzzled, he asked, Brother Long, what's wrong? Why are you looking at me like this? It's nothing. Jilin waved his hand. I just didn't expect you to play peeping. What's wrong? You're afraid that he'll run away, so you sent someone to watch him. You're quite considerate. It really refreshed my bottom line of humans. Jilin nodded repeatedly as he spoke. He used to hear his father say how dirty and despicable humans were, but he didn't know why he didn't have a direct understanding of it. Today, he finally opened his eyes. The third prince never thought that one day someone would actually say such things to him. His white face suddenly turned into the color of a pig's liver. Clang! The sound of sword being unsheathed was heard. Zhao Qi couldn't bear it anymore. As a subject, he had to die when the monarch was humiliated. As a friend, he had to sacrifice himself. No matter which side he was on, he couldn't let seventh grandfather Zhao remain silent. The sword light was like a rainbow, lonely and cold. It had the intention of dashing forward without regard for one's safety. It was unusually fierce. Zhao Qi knew that the opponent's strength was extraordinary, so this sword was full of strength. For seventh grandfather Zhao to be able to emerge from the bottom of the big capital, his own strength was certainly extraordinary. The sword was like lightning. Before the third prince could say anything to stop it, the sword had already stabbed behind Jilin. The third prince couldn't see Zhao Qi's sword at all, although he stabbed straight like a sword. However, Jilin was able to calmly turn around, raise his hand, stretch out his fingers, and pinch the tip of Zhao Qi's sword with his thumb and index finger. Wonderful to the max. Zhao Qi wanted to use his sword to cut off Jilin's fingers. Only then did he realize that no matter how much strength he exerted, he could not make his sword, which could cut through iron like mud, move even a little bit. Stop! The third prince had been shouting since the moment Zhao Qi pulled out his sword. He only shouted now. The shout was too late to stop Zhao Qi's sword, but it was not in vain. Jilin's fingertips that were about to plunge into Zhao Qi's chest stopped abruptly. Jilin quietly looked at the third prince. In the end, he sneered and let go of Zhao Qi's sword. His right fingernail was stained with some blood. What? Are you trying to silence me? Jilin laughed. Brother Long, what are you talking about? We were too impulsive. The third prince cupped his hands and apologized to Jilin. Zhao Qi's eyes were red, but he still maintained his original position and did not move. Old 7, go and rest first. Treat your injuries. The third prince patted Zhao Qi's shoulder and said, I believe that Brother Long will not harm me. Young master, Zhao Qi naturally did not agree. Let's go. If Brother Long really had ill intentions towards us, I'm afraid he would not have come over as soon as you invited him. Moreover, if Brother Long really wanted to touch me, it seems that you would not be able to stop him. The third prince said, This. Zhao Qi turned and walked out of the room. However, when he left, it was obvious that he was very depressed. The third prince did not panic in the face of danger and was not afraid of danger. Very extraordinary, Jilin said. However, compared to the rumors, there seems to be a big difference. Brother Long, it is better if you don't call me the third prince. I have already fallen out with the royal family. You should call me the third prince or Li Yu. The third prince said with a smile. I just don't know what the rumors say about me. Okay, the third prince. Jilin agreed. The third prince kept calling him Brother Long, which made him very satisfied. The rumors say that the third prince indulges in debauchery every day, leading a drunken life. He is so absurd that when a brothel opens during the day, he stays there all night without restraint, not knowing how long it has been. He is a character like mud, despised by people. Ah! The third prince laughed maniacally. What's so funny? Jilin asked. All the women are jealous of me. The rumors say that I indulge in debauchery. People are jealous of me. How can I not laugh? How can I not be proud of myself? The third prince said. They seem to be scolding you. Jilin was a little puzzled. He wondered if the person in front of him was stupid. No, because they're scolding me. It proves that they are jealous of me. The third prince said stubbornly. Why? Jilin asked. Because I'm living a life that they want to live but do not dare to. The third prince said. Then are you comfortable? Jilin asked. And? The third prince was stunned. Brother Long, why do you say that? A pot of wine and a flower is enough to comfort the mortal world. Naturally, it is very comfortable. I don't think so. Jilin laughed. A person who peeps all day shouldn't be able to say something like that. The third prince stopped pretending. Oh. The third prince smiled, but did not say anything. According to my observation yesterday, I found that under normal circumstances, human males would not look out the window when they are in a brothel. Jilin said. The third prince did not say anything, because this was a useless sentence. Who would look out the window when they were in a brothel? No matter how beautiful the scenery outside was, what was the point of coming here? The most beautiful scenery in the world was right next to them. When the golden wind and the jade dew meet, it would surpass countless people in the world. Had he never heard of this before? But you are different. Jilin saw that the third prince did not say anything, so he continued. You are sitting in this brothel for the sole purpose of looking out the window. More accurately, it is to look at the cloth store. After Jilin finished speaking, he pointed at the cloth store downstairs. He could still see the beautiful lady boss sending the customers out. With Jilin's hearing, he could still hear the lady boss gently calling out to the customers, walk slowly. I have been guarding this cloth store for 5 or 6 years. In order to confuse the public, I did not hesitate to sully myself. I thought it was flawless, but who would have thought that Brother Long, who has only been in the capital for a few days, would see through it? I am truly ashamed. The third prince said. What do you want? The third prince changed the topic. His tone was very stiff, but it was a matter of course. Nothing, Jilin said. That would be best. The third prince said with a sigh of relief. But I don't care what you want to do in the capital. I hope that you can stay away from her. That way, everyone will have less trouble. Brother Long, what do you think? Who's that person? Jilin asked. No matter what, you are still a prince. Why are you so fixated on that person? Why are you letting someone watch over her? I only stood there for a short while, and you already knew. That is protection, and that was not for a short while. It was for 6 to 8 hours. When I saw you standing there without moving, I thought that you had evil intentions. The third prince used his hand to hit his thigh and said angrily, just how much did this person think of him? No matter what, he was still known as the #1 person in the capital who cherished women. How preposterous! Okay. Jilin waved his hand, half-heartedly indicating that he already knew that the third prince did not have any evil intentions towards the lady boss. Then quickly tell me, who is that person? You. The third prince angrily glared at Jilin, then lowered his head dejectedly. You have to promise me that you will not tell anyone else. Okay. Jilin repeatedly nodded. I am the most trustworthy. If the third prince was like Aisha and had seen Jilin's speech about the human oath on the mobile city, he would not have easily believed Jilin's words and said the following. This matter has been hidden in my heart for a long time. Only Zhao Qi knows the ins and outs of the matter. Now that you have found out, it is good to tell you. That woman is called Xueqing. She is a maid who has served me since I was young. The third prince said, Is a maid worth your attention? Jilin did not believe it. He sat at the table, picked up an apple from the plate, took a bite, and asked. She is naturally different. When the third prince said this, even Jilin could see the infinite tenderness in his eyes. No. Can you be more serious? Do you think I am telling you a story? Don't interrupt. The third prince expressed his serious dissatisfaction with Jilin's sloppy attitude. Okay. Go ahead. Jilin said, I am the third child in the family. Although I can only see His Majesty a few times a year, I have nothing to complain about. Compared to the other brothers, I have already gained His Majesty's favor. As a prince, this is what I should do because His Majesty is really busy every day. He always stays in the Wuji Palace to deal with big and small matters. The Middle Empire is so big, there's no time for those matters to be dealt with. Therefore, His Majesty chose a playmate of the same age for every young prince to make up for his regret of not being able to personally accompany his children. My playmate is Xueqing. I see that you are very troubled by the fact that your country is too big. Jilin said. The third prince was stunned by the sudden interruption. This wasn't my main point. How about I help you shrink it by half? Jilin smiled and negotiated. No need to thank me. The third prince raised his voice by 2 whole pitches. I am joking. Go on, Jilin said repeatedly. How can this kind of joke be made so casually? Do you want to hear it or not? The third prince was flustered and exasperated as he roared at Jilin. He really didn't know what this person was thinking. How dare he say such disgraceful words in front of him? And he didn't even need to thank him. I want to hear it. Then why did you fall out with your father and come to this brothel? Jilin hurriedly changed the topic. It seemed that it was still too early to share his perfect plan with others. The third prince sighed deeply. Life is full of hardships, a pot of wine among the flowers, to comfort the mortal world. Although there was only a difference of 1 word, it was enough. The meaning and mood were thousands of miles apart. It was as if there were thousands of layers of misty rain and thousands of mountains and rivers. Chapter 94. Although the third young master's sigh was as deep as a bottomless river, Lin Mingya's heart was filled with emotions. His face was filled with worry, and he was so sincere. However, Qilin only wanted to smash the half-eaten apple in his hand into the third prince's face and tell him why the flowers in this world bloomed so brilliantly. In the end, however, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to control his strength and accidentally smash the third prince to death. Thus, he didn't do it. As a prince, you don't have to worry about food and clothing. Why are you lamenting about how difficult life is? How are the countless people outside the window supposed to feel? At this moment, even Jilin, who wasn't human, felt that the third prince was too pretentious. The third prince saw Jilin's expression and knew how much he despised him in his heart, and how much he disapproved of what he said just now. Because this expression was very common. So, the third prince didn't care, and said seriously to Jilin, as a member of the royal family, the world thinks that I should be carefree and have everything go according to plan. But in reality, it's not like that. The bitterness of being born in a royal family is not something that outsiders can understand. Oh, Jilin was interested. Tell me about it. Then I'll tell you some commonplace things. For example, in an ordinary family, as a younger brother, you can play behind your elder brother without worrying that he will kill you anytime and anywhere. As a son, you can never worry that your father will kill you. Even if you are really unforgivable, throughout human history, there hasn't been a father who would kill his own son for justice. But the royal family is an exception. For example, fighting within the same family, killing each other, the son killing the father, and the father killing the son. In other places, it's shocking. But in the royal family, it's just a common saying, it's perfectly justified. That's a bit impressive. You don't have it easy either. Jilin nodded. The bottom line of human shamelessness in his heart was lowered again. Yes, even a vicious tiger doesn't eat its cubs. Unfortunately, your majesty is a dragon. The third prince said sadly. Nonsense. Jilin scolded and crushed the apple in his hand. Even dragons don't eat their own children. Dragons treasured their own bloodline the most. They couldn't even let outsiders hurt them. So how could they eat their own children? Only you humans eat your own children. The third prince shook his head. The real royal family shouldn't be considered human. They're a bunch of monsters who only have eyes for the throne. If that's the case, the reason you're here and looking at the lady boss every day is because of the monster you speak of? Jilin asked. I'm a human. I can't stay among the monsters, the third prince said. Yes. Jilin nodded. Just based on this sentence, even if you want to stay, you won't be able to. I really didn't think that a guy like you who always drinks among the flowers would be so sentimental. All living beings suffer. It's just that others can't see it and can only experience it for themselves. The third prince said heavily and drank a cup of wine. Seeing Jilin's eyes flicker and ponder, he couldn't help but show off. Buddha said that all living beings suffer. There are two kinds of suffering in life. One can't ask for it, and the other can't let it go. But who can ask for it and let it go? Even immortals, Buddhas, gods, demons, and saints have not attained the purity of the Taishang. The Tathagata can't sense it. If you think living is so painful, why don't you die? If you can't do it yourself, I'll help you get rid of it. Jilin said disdainfully. Jilin couldn't understand. Most humans' lives were less than 100 years. It was like a white steed flashing across a crack. Life was so short, so why did they have to live in such pain and suffering? It wasn't the first time he heard that all living beings suffer. If that was the case, wouldn't it be better to end one's own life? Jilin used to think that the reason why humans lived was because they were instinctively afraid of death. But after seeing the war between the dwarves and humans, Jilin was a little uncertain. I don't want to die yet, the third prince said seriously. Humph. Jilin curled his lips and felt that his previous point of view was correct. The third prince poured another cup of wine, stood up, and looked at the cloth store outside the window. He said slowly, human beings suffer in this world. From the kings to the beggars, everyone thinks that life is hard, no matter who they are. Buddha also said that living in the world is like living in a thorny forest. If the heart is not moved, the body will not move, and there will be no injuries. That is to say, if people don't want to suffer in this world, then don't think about anything and don't do anything. Otherwise, injuries will be inevitable. But we are all mortals. Who can reach the realm of Buddha? No desires, no demands, no things, no self. These words are really just words. People always say that the tree wants to be still, but the wind will not stop. People in Jianghu have no choice. This is the realm of mortals like us. Buddha once said that all living things are suffering, but why do we still live in this world when we haven't reached the realm yet? Even if we are tortured, we are never tired of it. It is because people always say that they have hope and believe that one day the suffering will end and the good will come after the rain. In this painful and dark life, we will always have one or two bright spots in life that illuminate a part of our life. It is like the stars in the endless night. Although the light is small, it is still very dazzling in the darkness. It makes you feel that you have not lived in vain, and you have no regrets even if you die. It makes you feel that you are living for this, or because of this, your life is worth it. Perhaps as the ancients said, if you hear the truth in the morning, you can die in the evening. These bright spots may be interpreted differently by different people. It may be family, friendship, love, or the moment when you complete your mission, dream, or the moment when you eat delicious food. It is these bright spots that illuminate most of our dark lives and make us feel that life is worth it. All the sufferings in the past are not important. If you hear the truth in the morning, you can die in the evening. Jilin felt that Staya did not mean, if you hear the truth in the morning, you can die in the evening. But the third prince used it very well. So, you mean that woman is your bright spot? Jilin asked. No, she's my light. the third prince said firmly. Jilin suddenly narrowed his eyes. He felt that if his real body was here, all the scales on his body would stand up immediately. It was the first time for him to see a human being say such mushy words so confidently. Some people have billions of stars in the night. Even if 1 or 2 stars fall occasionally, they will not notice it. But there were some people who only had 1 star in their night sky. Then this star would be his sun. The sun is naturally light. If the sun is gone, the world will be gone. The third prince said, "Is it necessary?" Jilin did not believe it. How could a person who drank among the flowers all day long be so obsessed with a woman? It was just like how it was hard to imagine a person who owned a forest would care about a tree that was not very special. Thinking of this, Jilin suddenly remembered something. "I remember you said that you liked my friend a few days ago." Jilin immediately said loudly, "Brother Long, who do you think would like a woman who can throw a doorboard up to the 3rd floor? The third young master couldn't help but laugh. Being curious about a special woman is in line with my image as a playboy. If you cherish her so much, why do you still degrade yourself?" Jilin asked. "She is so close to you. It is impossible for her not to know. To protect her, I also don't want her to think that I came out of the palace because of her and feel guilty." The third prince said helplessly, "Protect her? Who would touch a lady boss of a cloth store? You sent so many people and it was not enough? And you went through so much trouble?" Jilin asked. "Ha!" The third prince laughed self-deprecatingly. "No matter what, I am still of royal blood. The only person who can make me go through so much trouble is naturally His Majesty." "Oh, the Emperor of the Middle Empire is very free," Jilin said. "No, as I said earlier, he's very busy and has a myriad of affairs to attend to." The third prince said. "So the way he deals with problems is very simple and direct, efficient and efficient. He has the ability and conditions to do so. If he knew that his son had rushed out of the palace just for a maid, he would have killed the maid without any hesitation. Then, he would have dealt with the rest later. So you go around fooling around and make the emperor think that you came out for all the women in the world? In any case, he can't kill all the women." Jilin asked with his eyes wide open. He felt that there were some problems with the logic in this and needed to think about it himself. "No. To this day, the emperor still thinks that my indulgence outside is a son's rebellion against his father. It is a normal phenomenon, normal to the point of being cliché and melodramatic. Thus, he did not seriously stop me at that time." The third prince said and could not help but smile proudly. The sun shone on his handsome face, making the flowers in full bloom in April pale in comparison. He was born to be a womanizer. Jilin suspected that the reason why the emperor allowed his son to fool around here was not because he felt that his son was rebellious or something, but because the third prince was really suitable here. He was like a fish in water. She had outstanding looks, a wealthy family, and was F*** sentimental. Most importantly, he was very contagious, sitting in the middle of a group of brothel girls, holding a cup of wine, pretending to be sad and reciting a pot of wine among the flowers to comfort the mortal world. This was enough to make the prostitutes, who had seen countless people, hold their hands to their chests and shed tears of heartache. If he wanted to talk about his difficult childhood, he would talk to Jilin about how all living things were suffering. He would talk a lot about this and that, making a non-human like Jilin indulge in wild and fanciful thoughts. This kind of person should stay in a brothel, because in a brothel, he could be overflowing with talent and unrestrained. He could make everyone applaud and cheer for him. But as soon as he left the brothel, this kind of person would be out of place everywhere. No one else was drinking, so why would he talk to others when he was drunk? Everyone was drunk, and he was the only one sober. Wasn't this the most tragic and lonesome experience in the world? Chapter 95. Jilin looked at the third prince's dazzling smile and could not help but speculate about his father's true thoughts. Then what was it that made the emperor think you were just a melodramatic rebel? Jilin asked. Speaking of which, I was too young and immature. The third prince said embarrassedly. It seemed that all men had this expression when they were reminiscing about their past, regardless of whether they were princes or commoners. When I was 12 years old, I really thought that Xueqing was the best woman in the world. She studied with me, played with me, and dared to steal 2 buns from the royal kitchen for me when I was punished by the emperor to kneel. She cared for me in every possible way and made me feel a rare kinship in the royal family. Jilin nodded. According to Staya's words, this should be the so-called childhood sweetheart? But the latter part was a bit like the Oedipus complex that Aisha said. It sounded a little complicated, but humans were complicated to begin with. This made sense. At that time, I gathered my courage and made a promise to Xueqing, the third prince said. Jilin nodded again. Aisha was right when she said that boys were impulsive when they were in love. Xueqing did not reject me, the third prince said. Jilin clicked his tongue in his heart and despised him. A personal maid was confessed to by a prince. How could she reject him? Jilin and Staya had been studying together for a while. Even if he did not know about other things, Jilin knew how much the human nobles valued the division of the human class. Because of this division of the human class, the nobles were above everyone else and enjoyed the fruits of the labor of the people at the bottom. Even if this division of the human class was very funny in Jilin's eyes, it was still an unshakable rule in the human community. She was just a maid. Like the third prince said, she could only sigh and say that she had no choice in the martial arts world. But there is no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the palace. I didn't expect my words to reach His Majesty's ears so quickly. It was said that when His Majesty heard this, he only smiled and said that it seemed that his child had grown up and it was time for him to marry a woman. Then, he discussed my marriage with the Prime Minister and chose a princess for me. At the same time, he drove Xueqing out of the palace. The third prince said with heartache, "Your father is quite decisive," Jilin said. "It can't even be considered a move." The third prince shook his head. The life and death of the people in the imperial palace is decided by the emperor's words. Everything depends on the emperor's mood. As a wise ruler, he could not casually kill any of his subjects, no matter how insignificant that person was. Because once he killed them, there would be loyal officials who were not afraid of death who would scold him for his cruelty. There would be upright and plain-spoken historians who would clearly record his brutality in the history books. No monarch would be willing to take such a risk to argue with a commoner. However, if the monarch wanted to kill the eunuchs or palace maids in the palace, then no one would raise the slightest objection. So, the way of dealing with things like driving someone out of the palace was already the most insignificant and most tolerant way of dealing with things. But if I went to tell the emperor, perhaps he would care about this matter. As long as the emperor cared, then Xueqing's life and death would be unpredictable. Xueqing was driven out of the imperial palace, so I could not stay any longer. So, I used the excuse that I was not satisfied with the marriage arranged by the emperor and wantonly made things difficult. In the end, I rushed out of the house. In other words, I ran away from the marriage. In fact, this kind of thing was not uncommon among the rich and powerful. After all, young people always yearn for free love in life. So, the emperor did not find it strange, because in the end, young people will inevitably compromise with life. Your father thought that you would compromise? Jilin asked. Probably. The third prince was somewhat uncertain. After all, the emperor believed that no prince could resist the temptation of the throne. He thought that one day, I would return to the imperial palace and compete with my brothers for that position. Then, do you want to be the emperor? Jilin looked at the third prince and said with a chuckle. His voice had a kind of temptation and a kind of self-confidence, as if as long as the third prince said the word yes, he could really let the third prince ascend to the top of the human race. What do you mean? The third prince was startled and asked sternly, "Do you really like this woman?" Jilin smiled and did not answer, continuing to ask, "Of course, I can even give up being a prince for Xueqing." The third prince said. Although Jilin did not know whether or not being a prince was a big deal, seeing how serious the third prince was, he agreed that he had indeed sacrificed a lot for love. Then why don't you pursue her? Instead, you stay here and peek at her every day? This kind of thing is a bit wretched. Jilin said, "I said before, I can't be too close to her. That will threaten her safety. Do you think I want to be like this?" The third prince said, "That was in the past. Jilin said with a smile. Huh? What do you mean? The third prince was a bit confused. I'll help you protect her. She won't be in any danger. Jilin said. The third prince did not expect Jilin to say this. The two of them had only met twice, and even if they were old friends, their relationship was still too shallow. It was okay to chat and drink when they met, but it was not to the point where he would ask his wife to present his son. Brother Long, you're joking. I'm not, Jilin said seriously. Brother Long, your background and strength are unknown. How can I trust you? How do I know if you have the strength to protect Xueqing? How do I know if you have ulterior motives? Things like seeing injustice on the road. This one has only seen it in books. The third prince said, Strength is easy to talk about. I'll stay here for a while, and you can find anyone to test me. Jilin said, As for ulterior motives, I do have my own purpose. Otherwise, why would I care about your trivial matters when I have nothing better to do? But don't worry, I won't harm you and that woman. After all, if I wanted to kill you, you would be dead by now. Young man, you don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. As soon as Jilin's voice fell, a man holding a sword walked in from the door. He was dressed in black, without any other color, like a moving mass of darkness. Shadow Guard? The third prince looked at the uninvited man and said bitterly, It's rare that the third prince still remembers us. When you left the palace, you were only a little more than 10 years old. The man in black said, Could it be that all these years there has always been a shadow guard by my side? The third prince asked with a trembling voice. Even if you have broken through the palace's door, His Majesty can't let his child die in the hands of a thief. It's only right to have someone protect you. The man in black said, It's just that all these years, Zhao Qi's ability is good, and he has always protected you well, so we didn't show up. But we didn't expect that today Zhao Qi would be defeated in Chun Feng Lu. Although the man in black was talking to the third prince, his eyes were fixed on Jilin, not moving for a moment. Although he couldn't see the strength of the young man in front of him, his beast-like intuition told him that the young man standing in front of him made his hair stand on end. So, all these years, I've been under His Majesty's control? The third prince couldn't believe it. If His Majesty is willing, I would like to call it under protection. The man in black said, Moreover, the land under the heavens belongs to His Majesty, and all the people on the shores of the land are His Majesty's subjects. In the entire Middle Empire, there is no one who can completely escape His Majesty's control. Third prince should understand this. Then, His Majesty also knows about Xueqing's matter? The third prince asked. That's not true. Although we also saw that third prince always let those hoodlums stay around the textile store, we thought that third prince was just being sentimental and didn't take it seriously. But we didn't expect it to be because of this. It's really surprising. Third prince. The man in black said, I think you're not much stronger than Zhao Qi. Jilin said, We're both at the 8th level of strength, but he's still young. I'm not as good as him. The man in black said, Then why did you dare to stop me? Jilin asked, Although Zhao Qi is a good man, he's still a lone wolf. I'm not the same as him. After saying this, the man in black clapped his hands calmly. Immediately, the sound of rushing wind could be heard outside the room. Jilin could sense that the roof and the door were full of people. It seemed that His Majesty still valued the third prince quite a bit. Now you understand? The Middle Empire's royal family doesn't tolerate blasphemy. Young man, it's best if you don't watch your mouth. Be careful of what you say. The man in black was now somewhat fearless. No matter how strong this young man was, he wasn't afraid because he had the entire Middle Empire behind him. But today, the man in black didn't really want to make a move. Because even if there were so many people, the man in black still didn't have the confidence to take him down cleanly. Right now, he could only hope that this young man would retreat. Once the third prince was safe, he would report to His Majesty. At that time, he would definitely put this young man between life and death. While he was at it, he would also take care of this Xueqing. Who would have thought that the third prince would break out of the palace just for a woman? Now, your secret is known by these people. Jilin didn't pay attention to the man in black. Instead, he said to the third prince, Let's continue the topic from before. in order to prove my strength to you. How about I help you kill all these people? Arrogant, the man in black said angrily. No one saw how Jilin moved. They only saw Jilin suddenly appear beside the man in black. Then, he raised his hand to grab the man in black's neck. The man in black was shocked and hurriedly pulled out his sword to protect himself. However, in front of Jilin's palm, the sword was easily destroyed and turned into countless fragments. Two of the fragments even entered the black-clothed man's body. The man in black's neck was held by Jilin. His feet were off the ground, and he couldn't move at all. His body was still bleeding profusely. Chapter 96. The man in black was caught by Jilin with one hand. He was extremely shocked. He had never thought that this ordinary-looking and harmless young man would have such terrifying strength. The man in black tried to struggle, but found that his hands and feet were no longer under his control. It was as if this body was no longer his. The man in black knew that this was the result of his vital energy being completely suppressed by the enemy. He was at the peak of the 8th rank and had fought with diamond rank experts before. However, none of those diamond rank experts could subdue him so easily. In other words, this young man was at least at the peak of the 9th rank, or at the peak of the diamond rank, perhaps even a little higher. However, the man in black didn't dare to think any further. The moment Jilin caught the man in black, a series of banging sounds were heard. Countless men in black came in from all directions. They broke in through the door, the roof, and the windows. They surrounded Jilin. It could be said that it was an inescapable net. Every man in black who came in was on guard, as if they were facing a great enemy. They stretched their bodies to the limit and aimed the weapons in their hands at Jilin's vital parts. There were swords, spears, daggers, and bows. Jilin even saw a man in black outside the door, holding a small energy cannon and aiming it at him. Moreover, the muzzle of the cannon was glowing. It was obvious that the energy was ready to go. Jilin was very familiar with this kind of thing. There was nothing strange about it. Now that the entire dwarf kingdom was in his territory, energy cannons like this were everywhere. However, Jilin didn't expect to see this kind of thing in this place. Don't worry about me. Protect the third prince with your life. The man in black shouted. No need. No need. The third prince also shouted. The rest of the men in black had already taken half a step forward upon hearing the commander's order. They were ready to launch the most brutal attack. Two men in black had already come to the third prince's side. They were waiting for their men to attack so that they could carry the third prince away. But when they heard the third prince's order, they couldn't help but hesitate. If it wasn't necessary, no one wanted to see the people around them die in front of their eyes. Third prince, please reconsider, the black-clothed leader said in a trembling voice. As a member of the imperial family, how can you stand in front of a dangerous wall? This person's strength is extremely high. If your highness doesn't leave quickly, your life will be in his hands. Even if I die, I won't regret it. All right, the third prince said, put him down. I believe in your strength. But they know your secret. Jilin didn't put her down. Look at how loyal you are. When you go back, you'll definitely tell your father everything. Aren't you afraid? I'm not afraid, said the third prince. Why? Because I have you now, the third prince said with a smile. Hee hee. Jilin laughed involuntarily and loosened his grip. Interesting. Very well. I wish us a pleasant cooperation, the third prince. Tomorrow, I'll bring people to find you. Let's discuss the next step. After Jilin finished speaking, he walked out of the room and left. Third prince, the black-clothed leader, stood up with difficulty with the help of his companions. He endured the pain in his chest and abdomen and said, I don't know what agreement your highness has with that person, but I think that before your highness's safety is guaranteed, it's not good to have too much contact with that person. It's fine. I have my own judgment. The third prince said, you can leave. You still have to go back and report. Third prince, this is tantamount to pulling chestnuts out of the fire. How many people can escape unscathed when they ask a tiger for its skin? The black-clothed leader anxiously knelt down on one knee and said, your highness's status is noble and your body is priceless. I hope your highness will be careful. Let me escort you back to the palace first. Now is not the time for you to be angry with His Majesty. It's not worth it for a woman. When the black-clothed leader knelt down, he made a decision. If the third prince insisted on not leaving with him, then he would kill that woman when he went downstairs later. If the third prince pursued the matter, he would pay with his life. No matter what method he used, he had to make the third prince return to the palace today. Please return to the palace, Your Highness. The rest of the black-clothed men knelt down and shouted, "Come, don't kneel when you're injured. Get up, get up. This isn't the palace, it's just a brothel. It's the most unruly place in the world. There's no need for this." The third prince helped the black-clothed leader up. "What's your name?" Replying to Your Highness, the shadow guard has no name. "Just call me Ingwu." Ingwu said, "Oh, okay. Ingwu, you go back first. Have a good talk with His Majesty. Let His Majesty decide." The third prince said, "But help me tell him, don't make a move on Xueqing. How can Your Highness think of His Majesty like that? His Majesty is the Emperor. How can he lower himself to make a move on a woman? It's simply the biggest joke in the world." Ingwu said, "His Majesty won't lower himself to do anything to a woman, but it's hard to guarantee that there's a smart person in the court who's loyal to His Majesty. Don't you think so?" The third prince looked at Ingwu meaningfully and said with a smile, "Ha, no. Your Highness has protected that woman so well. Without His Majesty's order, who in the capital would dare to offend Your Highness? That woman won't be in any danger." Ingwu said, "No matter how well guarded, who can guard against thieves for 1,000 days? The third prince said, "Your Highness' words are too disrespectful." Ingwu said in a deep voice, "I didn't say that His Majesty is a thief. Why are you so agitated?" The third prince said indifferently, "Help me tell His Majesty, if anything happens to Xueqing, I'll let that person kill all my brothers. Even if you guard against thieves for 1,000 days, you may not be able to guard against them." Ingwu broke out in cold sweat. He really didn't expect that the third prince would go to this extent for a woman. He just wanted to kill that woman. "Your Highness, be careful with your words. What's there to be afraid of?" The third prince said, "Your Highness' words, this subject doesn't dare to say it. How about you go back to the palace and tell His Majesty face to face?" Ingwu said. The third prince looked at Ingwu from the corner of his eyes like he was looking at a fool. How could he say this face to face? "I won't go back," the third prince said. "Your Highness, how can you be so childish? As a member of the imperial family, your life and death are related to the country. Nothing must happen to you." Ingwu said, "Stop it." The third prince said, "Life and death are related to the country. Nothing must happen to me. In this Middle Empire, there's only one emperor. If you want me to go back to the palace, you can have His Majesty abdicate and pass the throne to me. I promise to treat the retired emperor well." When Ingwu heard this, he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. What the third prince said, if it was an ordinary person, it might not be enough to kill the whole family 3 times. However, the third prince was not an ordinary person. After all, he was a prince. So Ingwu estimated that the third prince dying once was enough. Now he didn't want the third prince to go back to the palace. After all, dying in a brothel or in the palace, the only difference was whether he died in the hands of the emperor or some nameless hero. For the third prince, the difference was not big. After making up his mind, Ingwu bowed to the third prince and left with his people. He only hoped that His Majesty's order to capture the third prince would not fall on his head. Imperial Palace, Imperial Garden. The Golden King sat on a sandalwood chair with a golden fishing rod in his hand. It was unknown whether he was looking at the calm water surface or the fish in the water. His mouth kept talking to the Prime Minister. Fishing was a hobby that rarely appeared in the Emperor, because whether the fish was in the pond or caught, it was all his own. What fun was there in that? However, the Golden King did not think so. He felt that as long as he was in a fishing posture and sat by the water, he would be able to calm his mind. Therefore, he never brought bait or a fish basket when fishing. 3 years ago, which is the year 199, the Red Disaster came to Shengming City. The Shengming King held a meeting of the kings, and we discussed 2 policies. The first was to implement the adventure system in the entire continent. The second was to gather the strength of all the empires in Shangming City to prepare for war. When the time is right, we will crusade against the red disaster and dispel the haze over the human's head. A while ago, we felt that the preparations were almost done, so we let the Iron Blood King test the waters. When he came back from Shangming City, he was still on the Middle Empire's ship. I even had a good chat with him. Who would have thought that he would lose so badly? The Iron Blood King also told the other kings that the previous expectations and preparations were far from enough, and that they had to start all over again. We thought that he was trying to save face for himself after losing the battle, but who would have thought that the guy Mingyue would say the same thing when they came back? Zhuge Zhang did not think much of it. They had a good chat, and it must have been His Majesty's idea. The Iron Blood King was famous on the continent for not liking to talk. The only people who could make him finish a sentence without stopping were probably the other emperors of the human race. Moreover, the Prime Minister did not know what the Iron Blood King's loss of the battle had to do with His Majesty having a good chat with His Majesty or taking the country's ship. He could only say to the Golden King, "Your Majesty, it's not good to talk when fishing. You'll scare the fish away." "Hey, you old man, it's not like you don't know that I don't use bait when fishing. I'm just here to talk to you. Why are you still trying to make me angry?" The Golden King pulled the hook out of the water and held it in front of the Prime Minister. He pointed at the bear hook and said to the Prime Minister, "It is said that there was a saint in the mythological era who could catch a fish with a straight hook. Today, Your Majesty, you are a saint and a saint. You are as good as the previous saints. I thought that Your Majesty would be able to catch a fish," Zhuge Zhang said sincerely. The emperor was obviously touched by the Prime Minister's sincere attitude, or rather, he was disgusted. He laughed and was about to say something when someone shouted, "The Fifth Shadow Guard requests an audience with His Majesty." Chapter 97. Ingwu, let him in. The emperor said, "What do you think he's here for? Let him speak for himself later." Zhuge Zhang said, "You're really boring." The emperor said. The Prime Minister was silent. "Your Majesty." Ingwu came to the Golden King and knelt down. "You're injured." The emperor saw that Ingwu's wound was still bleeding. "What happened? Call the imperial physician." Ingwu came out of Chun Feng Lu and hurriedly rushed to the imperial palace without stopping, not even having time to bandage his wound. "This month, shouldn't it be your turn to look after His Highness?" When the Prime Minister saw that the Shadow Guards had returned with serious injuries, he immediately sensed the seriousness of the situation and asked seriously. Replying to the Prime Minister, "Yes." Ingwu said, "The Shadow Guard monitors the officials of the world and collects intelligence. There are countless things waiting for you to do. You're so busy, yet you still have time to look after that little bastard who's fooling around in the brothel all day?" The emperor frowned and said unhappily, "Who told you to go?" Ingwu lowered his head and didn't speak. He really didn't understand the emperor's meaning. Just then, the imperial physician came and helped him up and began to bandage his wound. "Speak. Who told you to go?" The emperor saw that Ingwu didn't dare to answer and immediately became angry. Then he saw the Prime Minister standing on the side and immediately pointed at the Prime Minister. "Is it you, old man, meddling in other people's business? You want to flatter me by looking after that little bastard? Your Majesty must be joking." The Prime Minister didn't panic in the face of the emperor's accusation. The Shadow Guard is the Imperial Guard and only takes orders from the emperor. How can the old minister command them? The matter of looking after His Highness was personally ordered by Your Majesty. It's natural for a father to be kind and filial to be his son. The Prime Minister's words made the emperor tremble with anger. Kind father and filial son? Damn it! Since when did his family have such a habit? If it was someone else who said this, the emperor could still treat it as if he didn't know. At most, he would just laugh it off. However, it was Zhuge Zhang who said it. In the emperor's ears, it was blatant mockery. Back when he was still a prince, he had killed so many of his brothers. Which one of them didn't have Zhuge Zhang's contribution? When he led the army to force the previous emperor to abdicate in the Wuji Palace, was the person standing behind him. Now you're telling me that the royal family is filial? If this wasn't mockery, then what was? How dare you? The emperor said angrily. 10,000 deaths. The prime minister immediately bowed and begged for forgiveness. He sounded terrified, but when other ministers said this, they were usually kneeling. I just don't know. How did the old minister offend His Majesty? I hope Your Majesty can tell me, or else this old minister will not die in peace. I didn't give such an order. The emperor thought for a moment and said, he couldn't say that it was a matter of filial piety, Your Majesty, this one did. The prime minister said, I didn't. The emperor said in a deep voice, this one did. The prime minister said stubbornly, no, this one won't argue with Your Majesty. Every order Your Majesty gives is recorded in the Hall of Secretaries. Even if it's a private order that doesn't go through the 3 provinces, it will be noted in Your Majesty's diary. Your Majesty can check it. The prime minister said, Chao Shi. The emperor called, this servant is here. A small eunuch bowed and ran to the emperor's side with small steps. Did you hear the prime minister's words? The emperor said, replying to Your Majesty, I heard. Go and check the diary right now. Find the page that the prime minister mentioned and tear it up. The emperor said, yes. The emperor looked disdainfully at the prime minister. The prime minister cupped his hands towards the emperor, showing that he was willing to admit defeat. But the slight smile in his eyes betrayed his true thoughts. What happened in the end? The emperor asked Ding Wu. This wasn't because the emperor only cared about the confrontation with the prime minister and forgot about this matter. But when Ing Wu said that he was responsible for looking after the third prince, the prime minister and the emperor knew that nothing major had happened. Because once something happened to the third prince, the shadow guard who were directly involved would have to commit suicide as an apology. Now that Ing Wu was alive, the third prince must be safe and sound. Ing Wu picked out what he could to tell the emperor, and then the emperor was angry. It wasn't the kind of anger that he had with the prime minister, but it was a real anger. Unfilial son. The emperor turned 3 times and roared, scaring away countless koi in the pond. Why didn't you bring him back? The third prince didn't want to return to the palace. Ing Wu said, then you didn't kidnap him back? The emperor said, this kind of thing this one naturally tried, but the third prince was very stubborn. This one was powerless. How did you try? The emperor asked. For years ago, on His Majesty's 40th birthday, he ordered the third prince to return to the palace to celebrate. This task was done by the shadow guard. This humble one was also there. This one held the rope and was about to tie the third prince up, but the third prince actually smashed a wine cup on the spot, picked up a piece, and put it in his mouth. He said that if this one took another step forward, he would swallow the piece. As he spoke, blood kept coming out of his mouth. This one was really scared at that time. Ing Wu said. The emperor looked at the prime minister in confusion. This is true. When His Majesty heard this at the banquet, he was very happy on the spot and praised the third prince for his courage. The prime minister said, but after the banquet, His Majesty returned to the palace and kicked over 2 copper palace lanterns. Hearing the prime minister's words, the emperor only felt a dull pain in his left foot. Only then did he remember that such a thing seemed to have happened. Since you couldn't bring him back, why didn't you bring that woman back to the palace? If that woman came back, wouldn't he come back as well? The emperor said. In fact, what the emperor really wanted to say was how to not kill this woman. But due to his status, this was not something an emperor could say in public. As an emperor, he was subject to more restrictions than normal people could imagine. He couldn't kill people easily, so as not to leave an impression on the populace that he was cruel and bloodthirsty. Even King Zhou, a famous tyrant in history, had to try his best to frame Ji Chong when he left him in Jiaoga City, but he didn't succeed in the end. Third prince, don't touch that woman. Ing Wu started sweating. The topic was heading in a dangerous direction. He had thought that if he didn't mention it and the emperor didn't ask about it, it would be over. He said don't touch her, so you don't touch her? He is merely a playboy who hangs around in the brothels all day long. Why do you listen to him? The emperor was puzzled. Ing Wu swallowed hard and said to the emperor with difficulty. The third prince asked this humble one to say, what did he say? He said that if something bad happened to that woman, he would ask that young man with the surname of Long to kill all the other princes. This be asterisk starred. The emperor was furious. How dare he? Did he say anything else? Say it. The third prince also said that if you want him to come back to the palace, as long as your majesty passes the throne to the third prince. The third prince also said that he would treat the retired emperor well. Ing Wu was sweating profusely just by repeating the words of the third prince. The emperor turned his head and glared at the prime minister, who couldn't help laughing. "What are you laughing at?" "Nothing." The prime minister waved his hand repeatedly. "This humble one is happy for your majesty." "Happy?" The tone of the Golden King's voice changed. "Yes, people say that like father, like son. Your majesty's child is also a little dragon. Although the third prince has been abandoned in the brothels for many years, his ambition has not diminished at all. If a prince who has been immersed in the brothels for many years can have such ambition, then there is no need to talk about the other princes who have been working hard to gain experience. Our Middle Empire has a successor. How can this humble one not be happy for your majesty?" The prime minister said. "Fine, be happy then." The emperor was so angry at the prime minister that he laughed. "When the day comes that this little b** starred leads troops to force me to abdicate, I don't believe he will let you go. When the time comes, this humble one only asks that the third prince spare my life. The old minister is willing to imprison himself in the palace and accompany your majesty fishing and playing chess all day. It is not a bad story." The prime minister said. "You are quite open-minded, but I have countless beauties in my harem. Do I need an old man like you to accompany me?" The emperor looked at the prime minister's ugly old face and said with disdain, "Once your majesty abdicates, all the concubines in the harem will definitely be sent to the imperial temple. When the time comes, you will not dislike the old minister." The prime minister said with a smile, "You have thought it through quite thoroughly. This humble one thinks that when the previous emperor abdicated to your majesty, he might not have been unhappy or worried. If one wants to be the emperor, these things are inevitable. How could the previous emperor not know? If he didn't experience these things, how could he govern such a large empire? If there is a prince who can cause your majesty to rebel, I am sure your majesty will be happy for him." The prime minister said, "Sire, you are right, but this third prince is too stupid. It makes me anxious just looking at him." The emperor suddenly wasn't angry anymore. He just sighed and spoke with a hint of disappointment. He wasted so many years in vain, yet he still shows off his abilities. He doesn't know how to endure. This is the path to death. The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. The first to die is always the bird that stands out. So what if he is ambitious? Without strength, he is just an ordinary man. The princes are still young. They will mature in a few years." The prime minister said. The emperor sighed and nodded. He turned and walked toward the Wuji palace. He had been delayed by the third prince's matter for a long time. It was long past the time to deal with government affairs. The Luo River had overflowed in Qingshan County again. If he didn't send people to provide relief, it would be another tragedy. The Shadow Guard reported that a plague had appeared in a village in Hebei. If it couldn't be controlled, the entire village would be burned down. The local officials couldn't make the decision. The Iron Blood King said that the preparations in Shengming City had to be redone. He had to send a letter to the Shengming King. There seemed to be some drought in the south this year. Recently, there had been some unfavorable rumors about Marshal Qin in the court. That's right, a woman this old and still not married. This matter had to be discussed with Azan. Shadow 5 saw the emperor leave and couldn't help but look at the prime minister with a questioning gaze. The prime minister shook his head at Shadow 5 and also left. Shadow 5 thought to himself, does this mean he won't care about it for now? Chapter 98. The next day, third young master waited for a whole day, but he didn't see the 30% of soldiers surrounding Chun Feng Lu as he expected. He knew in his heart that this matter was going to be left unsettled. The Golden King had always been decisive and efficient when dealing with national affairs. But when it came to the princes, his attitude was very thought-provoking. Just like the 16th prince, Li Wenruan, who was openly rebelling. As an emperor, there was only one way to deal with rebellions, and that was to eliminate the root of the problem, regardless of who it was. But the Golden King didn't do that. His punishment for the 16th prince couldn't even be considered a punishment. Even if he couldn't bear to kill his own son, he should have at least locked him up in the palace, so that he couldn't step out of the palace for the rest of his life. But the Golden King sent the 16th prince to the banks of the Luo River to repair the river. Although he had been exiled from the capital, the 16th prince still held great power when he went to a place with a status. Not to mention that he had such an important task of repairing the river. How was this an exile? This was clearly a flood dragon entering the sea, releasing a tiger back to the mountain. The emperor wasn't being merciful. He was simply raising a tiger to invite calamity. Of course, even if you had an emperor to let you enter the sea and return to the mountain, you had to be a flood dragon or a fierce tiger. If you were a small snake or a kitten, then forget it. If you fell into the sea, you would drown. If you entered the mountain, you would starve to death. It wasn't worth being careful. The third prince believed that his 16th brother had nothing to do with a fierce tiger. Then, in the emperor's eyes, was he a fierce tiger or a kitten? Thinking of this, the third prince couldn't help but chuckle. He shook his head, wondering why he was thinking about this. What did it have to do with him? What are you laughing at? Just as the third prince was lost in thought, he suddenly heard someone ask him. The third prince raised his eyelids and glared at Jilin, saying, "Nothing." The atmosphere in the room was very strange. A total of 5 people were sitting around a round wooden table on the 3rd floor of Spring Breeze House. One of them had a wine glass in his hand, and his eyes were blurred. He looked like he was lost in his own thoughts. The other 4 only focused on eating and didn't even look at him. The delicacies of the Middle Empire were the best in the continent. However, when Jilin saw the third prince smiling foolishly, he couldn't help but ask, "We just confirmed our alliance yesterday, and today you've brought people here to freeload?" The third prince said snappily, "Of course, you 2 beauties don't need to mind. I'm extremely happy that such beautiful ladies like you are willing to honor me with your presence. I couldn't ask for more. Come, let's have a few more drinks." As the third prince spoke, he stood up with a wine jug in his hand. With an extremely charming smile, he planned to personally bend down to pour wine for Staya and Aisha. Bane turned his head and looked at Aisha and Staya. He felt that the third prince was exaggerating a bit. If it was Aisha and Staya's original appearances, then they were indeed worthy of the third prince's praise. However, after changing their appearances, the 2 of them should only be considered above average in terms of beauty. However, in the words of this third young master, it felt as if they were 2 peerless beauties that could outshine the moon and put the flowers to shame. However, when Bane saw the 2 smiling like flowers, he suddenly didn't feel that the third prince was exaggerating. He was simply an expert. He should learn more from him. That way, he wouldn't have to drink Aisha's soup anymore. All right, don't do that anymore. Jilin raised his hand and blocked the third prince's wine jug. From today onwards, don't act like a playboy anymore. What playboy? You don't know how to talk. The third prince hurriedly said. When he turned his head and saw Staya's strange look, he hurriedly said, "Respect. I'm just expressing my respect and appreciation for beautiful ladies like you 2. I don't have any improper thoughts. Miss, please don't misunderstand." "Is that so?" Jilin asked, puzzled. "Yes," the third prince said with certainty. "But according to my observation, a normal and healthy human male should only have improper thoughts when he meets a beautiful lady for the first time," Jilin said as he nodded. He seemed to think that what he said made sense. Nonsense. The third prince's face turned red when he heard Jilin's words. He pointed his fan at Jilin and couldn't help but tremble. If it weren't for the fact that he knew he couldn't beat this guy, the third prince would have used his fan to stab him to death. Rude words. If what you said is true, what's the difference between humans and beasts? The third prince said. Jilin smiled and didn't say anything. He wanted to know the answer to that question too. Jilin once heard that the difference between humans and beasts was that humans knew how to use tools. But now, the best tools in the world were in Jilin's hands, and he was about to equip the strongest beast in the world with these tools. If a beast used a tool, what was the difference between humans and beasts? Maybe there's no difference? Jilin said. It's polite. Third young master yelled. You are a man who knows etiquette, justice, integrity, and shame. Aisha and Staya looked at each other when they heard the third prince's words. They couldn't help but nod lightly. They knew that this person would say that. The people of the Middle Empire were paranoid about etiquette. There was even a special department in the Middle Empire called the Ministry of Etiquette. The third prince was the third prince of the Middle Empire. He knew about etiquette since he was young. It would be strange if he didn't explode when he heard Jilin's words. Is that so? Jilin didn't deny it. Humans were always good at saying nice things. But saying it was one thing and reality was another. You're a person who hangs out in brothels all day, and you're telling me this? Forget it. The third prince waved his hand and decisively ended the topic. He felt that he shouldn't talk about it with this guy. You brought 3 friends here today. What's the matter? Staya was a bit disappointed. She originally hoped that the third prince and Jilin would have a good talk about etiquette. She didn't expect that the third prince would let Jilin find a flaw so quickly. Of course, we're here to help, Jilin said. Why would I need your help? The third prince asked. Did you defeat my guards and want to protect me personally? No. Jilin waved his hand. I'm here to help you get the lady boss. It's just that I'm not very good at this kind of thing. That's why I brought them here. The third prince suddenly froze. He realized that ever since he met this brother Long, his life seemed to have taken a drastic turn. He had never seen through this man who called himself Long. His way of thinking and his way of doing things were very different from normal people. Help him get girls? Ridiculous. But the third prince seriously looked at Jilin's expression. He really didn't seem to be joking. Looking at the other 3, they were all the same. Only then did he realize that Jilin was serious. The third prince couldn't hold it in anymore. Wasn't he looking down on him too much? Brother Long, even if I'm not talented, I don't need your help, right? The third prince stared at Jilin and said, Besides, I'm a famous playboy in the capital. I've learned a thing or 2 from my sisters in this romantic place. I think it's easy for me to deal with a lady boss. But according to my guess, a down-to-earth woman like the lady boss of the cloth shop wouldn't like a playboy like you, Staya said seriously. Not to mention, you've been in the brothel for several years right under her nose. Aisha continued. If she sees you, it's already good enough that she didn't spit at you. Although I've been in the brothel for many years, I've never been stained by a single flower. The third prince felt that what the 2 said made sense, so he quickly defended himself. Who would believe that? Jilin looked at the third prince and said calmly. He turned his head and asked Bane, Do you believe it? Bane shook his head resolutely. Look, if he doesn't believe it, then others won't believe it either, Jilin said. Bane was a little confused. No, Shueching and I were childhood sweethearts. She'll believe me, the third prince said. Jilin didn't say anything. He only looked at him with a playful smile. The third prince was enraged by Jilin's gaze. He shouted, Just you wait, I'll prove it to you. Third young master rushed out of the room after he finished speaking and went downstairs. It seemed that he wanted to go to the cloth store and confess his feelings to the lady boss. That's amazing, Bane sighed. He was so reckless that he could even be called brave. Can it work? Jilin asked. Impossible, Aisha said. I think so too, Staya said. Yes, Bane said. That's good. Jilin smiled. But there's no what if or something. Bane asked. No, Aisha and Staya said at the same time. Are you sure? Bane said. Haha, men, don't underestimate love, Aisha said. Otherwise, you'll know what it means to be heartbroken. You're over 100 years old, and you still believe in love? Staya asked curiously. I heard that you had a relationship with the Pope. Get lost. Chapter 99. Shueching. The third prince stood in front of the door of the cloth store and bowed with a fan in his hand as he softly called out to her. Affectionate, elegant, pretending to be calm, Shueching raised her head and was stunned. Her mouth was slightly open, and she was so shocked that she didn't even realize that the cloth in her hand had fallen to the ground. Your Highness, long time no see, Shueching said. Yes, it really has been a long time. How have you been all these years? The third prince stuttered as he thought about what he was going to say. He felt that it was difficult to breathe, as if he couldn't catch his breath. Aisha was on the 3rd floor. She slightly shook her head as she heard the conversation through the magic tool. She did think that the third prince would screw up, but she didn't think that he would screw up to this extent. It was as if he didn't screw up at all. What do you mean by how have you been all these years? Aren't you living well? Do I need you to ask? Didn't you learn a thing or two from the ladies in this brothel? Why don't you use it? Even if you don't want to be so direct, according to the customs of the Middle Empire, you should at least say, we haven't seen each other for many years, but we haven't forgotten each other for even a day. Or, Miss, you're even more beautiful than before. Shouldn't it be easy for someone like you to praise a girl for being beautiful? Why can't you say anything when it comes to the girl in question? All you can say is, how had you been all these years? Qilin was also paying attention to that side. Unlike Aisha, even if he didn't have any magic tools, he could still hear everything clearly with his ears. He wasn't as emotional as Aisha. He was just worried about the physical condition of the third prince. Since a while ago, the third prince's heartbeat had been a lot faster than usual. Furthermore, he was also having difficulty breathing. He was basically exhaling 3 times and inhaling 2 times. With the physical condition of a human, if this continued, Jilin felt that he was going to die. Staya didn't eavesdrop. She felt that eavesdropping wasn't in line with the moral standards of a light knight. Vane also wanted to listen, but he wasn't strong enough. I'm fine, thanks to your highness. Xueqing said, in confusion. The third prince stuttered. He couldn't say a complete sentence for a long time. In the end, he took a deep breath and finally made up his mind. Xueqing, I came here today because I have something to say. Third young master said. Yes. Xueqing nodded lightly. You know, I've liked you since I was a little. I still like you. Isa's right now. Do you still like me? SSSS? Do you still like me? Xueqing's expression was very interesting. She was clearly at a loss, but more likely, she was frightened. However, the third prince didn't have the ability to read people's expressions. He just looked at Xueqing and waited for her answer. Xueqing didn't say anything. She just shook her head. Understand. The third prince closed his eyes, nodded, and turned to leave. Your Highness, are you all right? Xueqing shouted as she looked at third young master's bleak back. The third prince didn't even turn his head. He just waved his hand and didn't stop. The heroes who had been watching this cloth store naturally saw this scene. When they saw their real boss, Broken Jean, sink into the sand, they all wanted to go forward and comfort him. However, after thinking about it, they all stopped in their tracks. Sai, who didn't taste the pain of love, this kind of injury could only be healed by oneself. It couldn't be avoided. At this moment, these fierce people who licked blood on their blades and killed people without blinking their eyes actually had the tenderness of a man of steel. They all came from that age. Who wasn't a young man who believed in love? However, when they looked back, they and the heroine in their stories were already old. No matter if the ending was a happy one or if things didn't turn out the way they wanted. Time passed quickly. The human world couldn't hold on. Vermilion beauty, CI, mirror flower CI, tree where did the human face go? The peach blossoms still smile in the spring breeze. Let's not talk about how the heroes reminisced about their lost youth. The third prince returned to the third floor of Chun Feng Lu and shouted for a pot of wine. Then, he continued to drink cup after cup. The waiter who delivered the wine was scared to death. He had never seen the third prince like this. Although the third prince had stayed in Chun Feng Lu for many years, his alcohol tolerance wasn't very good. Usually, after 3 pots of wine, someone had to wait on him to go to bed. But today, the third prince felt that the more he drank, the more excited and clear-headed he became. Aisha and the other 2 shook their heads as they watched him drown his sorrows in alcohol. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have done it in the first place. All right, that's enough, Jilin said. Didn't your ancestors say that drinking away one's sorrows will only make one more sorrowful? Then there are people who say that only Du Kong and Indigo Collar can soothe my heart. The third prince raised his head and drank another cup. Indigo Collar can soothe my heart. Even if I don't go, Xening won't have a voice. The third prince drank another mouthful of wine and recited, It's only been a few years. Why do you think she changed? The third prince asked Jilin. Jilin didn't know why, but he suddenly had an impulse to smash this person into pieces. But after thinking about his plan, he suppressed it and patiently said to the third prince, According to my observation, humans are fickle, and human females are even more so. It's very normal, very normal. But he didn't expect that the third prince didn't pay attention to him at all. He drank another mouthful of wine and recited a poem. If life is only like the first time we meet, what is the sad autumn wind painting fan? Ordinary changes, but the old man's heart changes, but the old man's heart changes easily. As he recited, tears began to fall from the third young master's eyes. Aisha felt extremely disdainful. Reciting so many poems, why didn't he recite them in front of the girl? Who was he reciting them to now? He was so eloquent that he couldn't even speak clearly at the critical moment. He still had the face to cry. If you have tears, you should cry in front of the girl. That's what a real man is. A grown man, in front of the girl he liked, without caring about his face, crying like a pear blossom in the rain, and telling the other party about his love in a tearful voice. If he put in a little more effort and prepared a draft in advance, Aisha felt that a normal girl wouldn't be able to stand it. Anyway, when the Pope tearfully told her that he could give up the god of light for her, Aisha couldn't resist. Staya felt that although this person was a bit licentious, he was still very infatuated. Bane felt that this brother was simply a warrior, or rather, a brute. He immediately poured a glass of wine and raised it to the third prince. "Come, brother, let me toast you. A real man, it's okay to fail once. You can regroup and try again." If it was in the past, the third prince would definitely maintain his status and never clinked glasses with others. He would even say in his heart, "Who do you think you are? How dare you call me brother?" Then he would smile and politely decline. But today, the third prince didn't say anything. He raised his glass and clinked it with Bane's. Then he raised his head and drank it all. Since he came back, this was the first time he heard a human speak. Dragon didn't say what he expected. Of the two girls, one said that he was too reckless, and the other said that he was a piece of trash. "Actually, I've always wanted to ask you something," Jilin said to the third prince. "What is it?" The third prince said. "That immortal poet, is she really your ancestor?" Jilin said. Staya and Bane heard Jilin talk about the ancestor, so they stopped fooling around. Aisha, on the other hand, was still very interested. "Of course." The third prince sniffled and said. Even though his confession was rejected and his mind was in a mess, when he heard this question, the third prince still answered firmly. "Then is that thing true?" Jilin asked. The third prince saw how serious Jilin was, so he wiped away his tears and forced himself to calm down. He asked seriously, "What thing?" "That is, when your ancestor was young, he saw an old lady grinding an iron rod." Jilin asked. "Of course it's true." The third prince said in a deep voice, "Beside the stream at the foot of Elephant Ear Mountain in May Province, there is still a Wushur rock standing there. Legend has it that the old lady was grinding her iron rod with." "Oh," Jilin nodded. "Then according to human words, what is the old lady's cultivation level?" The third prince paused. "According to my impression, she should be an ordinary woman with no cultivation level." "Why do you ask? Why would an ordinary old lady want to grind an iron rod into a needle?" Jilin said. "And from what I know, the number of humans is more than the amount of sand in the river. But other than that woman, no other human has ever done something like grinding an iron rod into a needle. It's rare, but such a rare thing happened to be seen by your ancestor when he was playing truant. Don't you think it's too much of a coincidence?" You." The third prince held the wine glass in one hand and pointed at Jilin with the other. He seemed to have thousands of words in his heart, but he didn't know what to say. "What do you want?" "Nothing, just to help you calm down," Jilin said calmly. "Also, when you failed to confess, although you looked like you were in pain, your heartbeat, breathing, and other physical reactions were much calmer than before. Why is that? Shouldn't you be in more pain?" The third prince obviously couldn't keep up with Jilin's extremely stiff way of speaking. After a moment of silence, he tried very hard to sort out his thoughts. Then he laughed bitterly and became dejected. He slumped into the chair and said, "Actually, I was prepared for this result." "Oh," Aisha asked curiously. "It's not just me. I think, when a boy confesses, he's prepared for failure in advance." The third prince said, "Even more so, I'm afraid that after being rejected, they've already thought about where to drink at night. But even if they're prepared in advance, it's still very uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. Bane nodded repeatedly at the side, expressing his agreement. Aisha curled her lips. These two trash. Chapter 100. Compared to Aisha's disdain, Staya was a little touched. Qilin, on the other hand, was different from everyone else. He began to view the third young master in a new light. Third young master actually said that it was a matter of mutual consent, and it was a matter of mutual consent. He even made it sound like he was going to die for it. What did that mean? He knew that he would fail, and he would be in so much pain that he wanted to die, but he would still confess his feelings to the person he liked and fight for that tiny chance. What kind of courage was that? From Jilin's point of view, it was not a simple, I like you. It was simply putting one's dignity on the ground and letting others trample on it. There were only two results. One was that the other party would step on your dignity and leave as expected. The other was that the other party would unexpectedly pick up your dignity gently, wipe it clean, and return it to you, and then throw herself into your arms. Was this what humans meant when they said that high risk meant high reward? Did humans have to go through so many difficulties to reproduce? It was a miracle that humans could reproduce such a large group. Presumably, even the Father God, who could stop Satan's rebellion with a wave of his hand, did not expect this. Jilin was moved by the courage of the third prince. He turned his head and told Aisha what he thought and lamented the miracle of human reproduction. Who knew that Aisha would chuckle? What are you laughing at? Jilin asked curiously. I'm laughing at how you are still so naive after being with humans for so long, Aisha said with a smile while rubbing Jilin's hair. It was as if she was really an ordinary teenager who did not understand the world and said something that made people laugh, and not a megalosaurus that looked down from above and lamented that it was not easy for humans to survive. Jilin raised his eyebrows, looked out of the window, and realized that it was a bit cloudy. This made it difficult for Jilin to determine whether the sun rose from the west today. Jilin made up his mind. If Aisha couldn't say anything reasonable, then he would try to kill her again and see if he could kill her. Although he had sworn an oath, but before he completely killed her, it would be fine, right? It should be Aisha didn't know that Jilin already wanted to kill her. She continued, this is just a normal behavior of a man. It's not as great as you think. There's a word I don't know if Staya has taught you before. It's called lust. Jilin shook his head. Staya spat. Why did she teach Jilin this? Bane, on the other hand, actively expressed that he knew this phrase. This is nothing more than a man's instinctive behavior driven by his desire to devour his rationality. Aisha said, otherwise, why would he be so reckless and not be able to speak clearly in front of her? Jilin tilted his head and thought. It seemed to make sense. The third prince slammed the wine glass on the table. He wanted to refute, but after thinking for a long time, he actually felt that Aisha's words made sense. Staya obviously didn't agree with Aisha's point of view. She pushed away the hand that was still on Jilin's head and said, human love is naturally different from those desires. What's the difference? Aisha asked. It's purer and more noble. Staya said, all the original sins of human beings are mostly self-serving. But love is different. It's a desire to hope that others can be happy. There's a saint in the Sami Empire who said that love is like a light. It illuminates two people at the same time, and the light won't weaken. This is a selfless and pure behavior that can make oneself happy and make the other person happy by only giving and not needing anything in return. It's a gift from God, and it benefits all living beings. It's the best way for all living beings to obtain happiness. Aisha shook her head helplessly. Religious believers were always like this. Once they mentioned their God, they would burst out with extreme passion and strong persuasiveness, or rather, strong ability to bewitch people. Although for a heretic like Aisha, she definitely wouldn't be bewitched by Staya, but she definitely wouldn't be able to have a normal conversation with her. Jilin felt that Staya's words made sense. At the same time, he thought, why are there so many saints and human beings? No, what do you want? The third prince finally couldn't hold it in anymore. I'm very uncomfortable now. I don't want to talk about such a complicated thing like love with you. If you really want to talk about it, can you go back and talk? Come back another day. I'll help you. How do you feel now? Jilin asked. Isn't that nonsense? Didn't I say that I'm uncomfortable? The third prince was a little flustered. He really wanted to chase them away. What's wrong with this person? It's fine if he doesn't comfort me. But why is he rubbing salt on my wound? We're afraid that after we leave, you'll drown in your own tears again, Aisha said viciously. Get out. The third prince suddenly stood up and shouted while pointing at the door. However, there were still 2 strings of tears on his face. Making him look less imposing, Jilin walked to his side, put his hand on his shoulder, and pressed down gently. Can you be more specific? The third prince was pressed down on the chair without any suspense. The third prince tried to stand up twice, but he only felt a slight pain in his neck. Then, he cleverly gave up. If I were to describe my current feelings, the third prince thought for a moment and said, I didn't even have her for a second, but I feel like I've lost her countless times. Jilin was so shocked by the third prince's words that he took a step back and let go of his hand. He felt that this person was stupid and had become even more creepy than Staya when she was in a trance. No, Jilin interrupted him. You're so in love with her. The third prince nodded. That's not right. According to my observation, you shouldn't be like this. Jilin held his chin with his hand, frowned, and murmured. The third prince paused. Then how do you think I should react? Tisk tsk. Tell me, someone like you, who's said to be a veteran in the field of flowers and has seen countless women, isn't that right? Jilin said. The wording is a bit inappropriate, the third prince said, but it's not wrong. That's strange. A person like you must have high standards. You must have suffered a lot of injuries, Jilin said. The third prince nodded with tears in his eyes. Then how did you get hit so hard by a lady boss? Jilin pointed out the window and asked, according to human aesthetics, she's not a peerless beauty, right? She's just above average. According to my expectations, after you got rejected, you would at most drink 2 glasses of wine. Why can't you let it go? According to you, you should laugh 3 times after drinking 2 glasses of wine. You should be reciting, I see how charming the Green Mountain is. I expect the Green Mountain to see me. Or it should be your ancestors, those who abandoned me. Yesterday's day cannot be kept. Those who disturb my heart, today's day is so troublesome. What are you reciting? The heart of an old friend changes easily. Is this the style of Lao Li's family? After you got rejected, you should drink 2 glasses of wine, recite a few lines of poetry, and then go out to drink and have fun. How did you get trapped by such an ordinary woman? What do you like about her? What is it about her that makes you so infatuated? Jilin really couldn't figure out how a woman who he couldn't see anything special about could make such a handsome man seek death. If you ask me to say it like this, I can't say it. The third prince calmed down a lot. But I know, I just like her. There are obviously people you think are boring and willful. They're not very good looking. But it doesn't make sense for me to like her so much that I can't extricate myself. If there's a reasonable explanation, maybe it's fate playing tricks on people. It's good to say it now. What were you doing earlier? When Aisha saw that this good-looking man dared to speak so arrogantly without even stopping his tears, she was very unhappy in her heart. Sure enough, with this sentence, the third prince was speechless. Chapter 101. When a person says, gods will make a fool of people, it means that this person is already unreasonable. Others don't have to say anything to him because he won't listen. Jilin still admired the wisdom of humans in this matter. Humans actually thought of blaming the heavens. When they really couldn't do it, they would look up to the heavens and sigh 1 or 2 words, God doesn't help me. God makes a fool of people. Man proposes, God disposes, and so on. As if as long as they say so, they don't have any responsibility. This is really whimsical. What does the heavens have to do with you humans? Why do you blame everything on the heavens? Jilin didn't know if the Father of the heavens knew about this behavior of humans. The Father was high and aloof, detached from everything. Nothing could affect him. He silently watched the flow of the Milky Way, the birth and death of all things. For hundreds of millions of years, he rarely did anything. When Satan rebelled in the heavens, he led half of the angels to fight with the archangels for a few days. This made the Father impatient, and with a gentle wave of his hand, he knocked Satan down from the heavens. If the Father knew that he didn't do anything, yet he had taken the blame for so many things in the human world. Even the rejection of a man's confession could be blamed on him. It was estimated that the Father would send down another flood to wash the world clean. Jilin looked at the silent third prince and put on his signature expression. He narrowed his eyes, raised his head high, and looked at the other side. Jilin inadvertently revealed his instinctive action, indicating that he was looking at the third prince very seriously. He really didn't expect that this human teenager would be so stubborn towards an ordinary woman. For a person who had been living in a brothel all year round, this was really a bit abnormal. After all, a person who really had a forest, but always wanted to hang himself on a tree, it seemed that there had never been such a person. Don't say that he has a special affection, that it's difficult to be water after crossing the sea, that it's impossible to be clouds after crossing Mount Wu. Jilin didn't believe it. Moreover, the human who wrote this poem, in Jilin's view, was not a good person. Jilin suddenly grinned, stuck out his tongue, and licked his fangs, showing great interest. No matter what, you can't stay here any longer. We need to find another place. Aisha looked at the silent third young master and said with a disappointed look on her face. The third prince nodded. Even though he had suffered a huge blow, he was still smart enough not to ask why. Have you decided where to move to? Bane asked. The third prince looked at the fabric store through the drizzle outside the window. Since it was raining, there were naturally fewer people on the streets. Of course, there wasn't much business in the cloth store, so it seemed a little desolate. On the contrary, the umbrella shop next to the cloth shop was quite lively. Occasionally, 2 or 3 pedestrians without umbrellas would rush into the umbrella shop in the drizzle, buy an umbrella, and leave in a hurry with it. Whenever it rained, the umbrella shop owner would grin from ear to ear. No matter what, umbrellas in the rain were more expensive than usual. Moreover, the neighbors could not say that he was wrong at all. After all, it was considered reasonable. The extra money he earned was simply a gift from the heavens. But the third prince didn't think it was right. Shueching's side was cold and cheerless, but your side was bustling with activity. What was the reason? Didn't you think it was inappropriate and eye-catching? I've thought about it, the third prince said. The more the third prince looked at the umbrella shop, the more he felt that he was wise. A mere merchant knew how to make use of the weather. As the third prince, how could he not know how to make use of the geographical advantage? Aisha followed the third prince's gaze and looked at the umbrella shop. She frowned slightly. She felt that the third prince was still a little rash. This was too close. Such a direct action. If it was a case of mutual affection, it would naturally be excellent. They could directly attack the root of the problem and save a lot of trouble. But the problem was, how could this kind of thing save trouble? Once things were thwarted like today, both sides would be extremely embarrassed, and there would be no room for negotiation. The third prince could run back today, drink, and cry. But once he moved to the cloth shop next door, where could he run to? If the third prince was so shocked that he hid in the house all day and didn't dare to go out, then he would be happy. Although Aisha wasn't optimistic about the third prince's decision, she didn't intend to say anything. Because the third prince had now become a brainless brute who couldn't listen to others, Aisha naturally didn't want to waste her breath. The characteristic of witches was that they didn't do useless things as much as possible. And the characteristic of a brute like the third prince was that he could do as he pleased, and it was very simple and direct. Or it could be said that he skipped the steps of thinking. The third prince waved to the people on the street. Even though it was raining, there were still people on the street paying attention to the situation in the building. A majestic man with a tattoo on his arm ran upstairs. The third prince told the man that he wanted to take over the umbrella shop. Qilin was looking forward to seeing with his own eyes how the privileged class of humans oppressed the common people. Although he had come into contact with a lot of humans, but he really hadn't seen this kind of thing. He had only heard about it from his father in stories. He didn't know why, but Qilin had seen the upper echelons of the human race in the Snow Wind Empire. Although they weren't good people, but they were all for the country and the people. They all had a righteous appearance, and they didn't have the dirty feeling that he had in mind. Now that there was such an authentic hedonistic son of rich parents, and he had opened up the dark corner of the human race. Jilin was naturally looking forward to it. In Jilin's mind, a very picturesque story had already emerged. The third prince wanted to buy the shop, but the boss refused to sell. The third prince wanted to buy it, but the boss was determined not to sell. In the end, the third prince flew into a rage out of humiliation and mobilized his underlings. The boss's wife and children were separated, and his family was ruined. Logically speaking, this story should have an ending many years later, where the boss's son avenged his father. But Jilin considered the third prince's actual situation and didn't think so. However, Jilin and third young master were both surprised by the burly man's words. This umbrella shop was originally under the name of the third prince. It was specially bought by the young master for the convenience of taking care of Miss Shueching. The umbrella shop's owner is also a brother of the gang. Could it be that the young master has forgotten? After the man finished speaking, he wanted to slap himself. His words were superfluous. Since the third prince asked this, he must have forgotten everything. It seemed that the biggest characteristic of nobles was indeed forgetfulness. The next day, Imperial Palace, Imperial Study. The Golden King sat behind his desk, reviewing the fixed number of memorials that came in every day. Countless national affairs were settled in this study with a single stroke. Countless people's fates were quietly turned upside down in this study, and they didn't even know it. Being able to change the fates of countless people will inevitably made the Golden King feel that he was on par with the gods. As an emperor who could decide the life and death of tens of thousands of people with a single word, it wasn't strange for him to have such feelings. Sometimes, the Golden King would also think that there was a god in heaven called the Arbiter of Fate, who was responsible for controlling people's fates. The Arbiter of Fate had a magic weapon called the Fate Wheel. It recorded the fates of everyone before they were even born. From birth to death, there was no exception. Now, the matters of heaven could no longer be verified, but wasn't he doing the same thing as the Arbiter of Fate? How similar was his imperial study room to that Fate Wheel? Your Majesty, you haven't made a decision about Marshal Qin yet. Prime Minister Zhuge saw that the emperor was a little lost in thought, so he picked up the tea beside him and took a sip, moistening his throat as he spoke. The emperor came back to his senses and glanced at the prime minister in annoyance. But he had to admit that although he always felt like he was on par with the gods, he didn't really think of himself as a god. It had to be said that the prime minister played a big part in this. Every time the emperor was floating in the air, the prime minister would always throw out one or two troublesome matters to the emperor, telling him that he hadn't finished his work yet, so he shouldn't think too much. Then, the emperor would face those matters and begin to work in silence. At the same time, he would sigh that no god in this world would work as hard as him. In the whole country, no one dares to marry Marshal Qin. So what can I do? The emperor continued to review the memorials and said in annoyance, "With a great reward, there will be brave men," the prime minister said, "who would give up their life for money." The emperor felt that the prime minister was oversimplifying this matter. Besides, Marshal Qin has to like it. Sigh. Back then, Marshal Qin said in the main hall that a woman should not give in to a man, and that a general might not be her husband, so it was destined that she wouldn't be able to marry smoothly. The prime minister sighed, which was very rare. If it wasn't for Marshal Qin's brilliance, it wouldn't have ended up like this. For a woman to lead an army, there is nothing more difficult than this in the world. If her brilliance isn't brilliant, how can she lead an army? The emperor said, "Even so, there is no need to maintain the style of the army outside of the army," the prime minister said in an exaggerated tone. The emperor glanced at the prime minister, put down the pen in his hand, and rubbed his stiff face. He naturally knew about the things that the prime minister said, or rather, there was no one in the whole country who didn't know. Since everyone knew, then there was no need to specially mention it in private. The prime minister was bringing up the difficult problem of finding a husband for Marshal Qin again, as if he was afraid that the emperor would forget something. However, as the prime minister, if he only raised a problem but couldn't provide a solution, then it wasn't a problem, but a pure complaint. The emperor understood that this was the prime minister complaining to him. Why did he have to discuss the matter of finding a husband for Marshal Qin with him? the prime minister. This matter was neither big nor small, but it was very sensitive and awkward, as the empire's prime minister. Zhuge Zhang was naturally unwilling to be asked to think about matchmaking. This matter can only be done by you. I don't trust anyone else, the emperor said in a deep voice, full of sincerity, as if he was entrusting an important matter. Chapter 102. When the prime minister heard the emperor say this, he felt his head hurt even more. It looked like he couldn't avoid this matter. Does your majesty have anyone in mind? The prime minister asked. If I had someone in mind, why would I need you? The emperor said angrily when he saw that the prime minister still didn't want to give up and wanted to kick the ball around. Your majesty, for Marshal Qin's marriage, the orders of his parents and the words of a matchmaker are useless. Even if your majesty is the emperor, if you want to arrange a marriage for Marshal Qin, the old minister thinks it won't be easy. Besides, Marshal Qin is, after all, an important official in court who controls a large number of troops. If you don't handle it well, it will cause a lot of trouble. Why don't we avoid trouble? The prime minister said. Do you really not know? Or are you purposely playing dumb in front of me? The emperor threw the red brush in his hand into the brush washer, making a big splash. As the great marshal of the West, Qin holds 1/5 of the empire's military power. He holds an important position and has a high position, but he hasn't been in the capital for a long time. As a general, who doesn't have a large family in the capital. However, Marshal Qin still hasn't gotten married, so he's too carefree. But your majesty, Marshal Qin's parents and brother are still in the capital, the prime minister said hurriedly. Besides, Marshal Qin is loyal and devoted. Heaven and earth can bear witness to that. I know. What are you shouting for? The emperor shouted in a low voice. I won't suspect my own marshal for no reason. However, when the marshal goes out to war, there must be restraint in the capital. This has been the custom for generations. Aren't there Marshal Qin's parents? The prime minister said. The emperor waved his hand and interrupted the prime minister. He said to the prime minister, Azan, do you think that a marriage issue alone is enough for me to transfer the great marshal of the West back to the capital? Hearing the emperor say this, Zhuge Zhang's breathing quickened. He said nervously, could it be? The emperor nodded. Ever since Marshal Qin took charge of the western region, a royal doctor would go to the Qin family every 3 days to check on the two elders. A few days ago, the royal doctor reported that old General Qin might not live past next year, the emperor said. The prime minister understood why the emperor wanted Marshal Qin to get married. One of the two Marshal Qin elders was about to pass away, so how long could the other live? If the two elders were to pass away one day, then Marshal Qin would truly have nothing to worry about. Moreover, this was a good opportunity. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Due to the appearance of the Red Calamity, the 5 great empires of humanity began to unite as one. There were no wars at the borders of the empires. This way, as the Western Marshal, Qin was able to return to the capital. If this had happened a few years ago when the human empires were in constant conflict, not to mention that old General Qin could still live for another year. Even if the two old men died together, Marshal Qin really did not have any control. The emperor would not dare to transfer Marshal Qin back to the capital. And it was likely that Marshal Qin would not be able to come back even if she wanted to. Your Majesty, Marshal Qin is only a woman after all, the prime minister said. From Zhuge Zhang's point of view, the emperor's fear of commanding generals was nothing more than worrying that they would wear the emperor's robes. However, looking at the history books, the matter of a military general claiming the title of emperor had always only happened in times of turmoil and chaos. But now, the emperor was considered wise, and the Middle Empire was also peaceful. There was no such worry at all. And most importantly, Marshal Qin was only a woman. How could she wear the emperor's robes? Woman, the emperor chuckled. The truly ruthless characters have always been women. How can they be looked down upon? These words, what is the reason behind them? When the prime minister heard the emperor say something he had never heard of before, his bookworm habit from his early years suddenly flared up. The emperor was accidentally choked by the prime minister's words. He could not tell anyone that anyone from Lao Li's family had a bone-deep fear and suspicion towards women. who said that women could not wear the emperor's robes. Since the founding of the Middle Empire, wasn't there a female emperor? And she was Lao Li's daughter-in-law. Because of that female emperor, several generations of Lao Li's family's views towards women had changed. From the emperor's point of view, this world was indeed dominated by men. In the Middle Empire, it was not wrong for men to be superior to women. But what caused this situation was not that men were really much stronger than women, but that the two fundamentally had different desires. Men wanted nothing more than fame and fortune, to live in luxurious houses, and to have beautiful concubines. Those who were more ambitious would want to show off what they had learned, build a career, and become famous. Women, on the other hand, wanted to live a peaceful and happy life, to take care of their husbands and children. They did not want fame and fortune, and were too lazy to build a career. That was why men could flaunt their power in this world and call the wind and summon the rain. It was not that they were stronger than women, but that they were too lazy to compete with them. But once a woman felt that there was no hope for a happy life, it was inevitable that she would have other thoughts. Just like that female emperor, who had countless generations of great-grandmother. After her two men died, she gave up on the so-called happy life as a woman. Then, she took over the Li family's world. At that time, countless members of the Li family's royal family trembled under that woman's bright yellow dress, living in constant fear. This was a humiliation and pain that the Li family would never forget. When Qianlan said in the main hall that women did not need to give in to men, and that generals were not necessarily husbands, everyone else scoffed. Only the emperor felt the same way. He felt the same way to the point that he was sweating profusely. Another talented woman had appeared, but he did not know whether it was a blessing or a curse. The emperor was not worried that Marshal Qin would really wear the emperor's robe. Qianlan was not like that female emperor. She did not have any qualifications to be called an emperor. She did not have the right time or the right people. But even if he was not worried, he still had to use the necessary means. Otherwise, the other generals would inevitably feel unbalanced. Maintaining balance was the basic quality of an emperor. When the prime minister saw that the emperor was ignoring him, he only thought that the emperor had made up his mind. "Your Majesty, since it is like this, why not let Marshal Qin marry into the royal family? The third Prince Liu is a good choice." The prime minister said, "Absolutely not." The emperor suddenly slammed the table and loudly shouted. He was just thinking that Qianlan did not have the qualifications to be an emperor, and in the blink of an eye, his prime minister was going to be sent to someone else. How could the emperor not be anxious? The prime minister was startled by the emperor's sudden outburst and wondered what was going on. Marshal Qin marrying into the royal family? Absolutely not. The emperor said firmly, leaving no room for negotiation. The prime minister nodded, although he did not know why. Since the emperor was so insistent, he could only listen. The matter of Marshal Qin, you can do as you see fit. Once you have decided on a candidate, let me know. The emperor said. He believed that the prime minister could handle the stakes well. The old minister obeys. The prime minister bowed. Now that things had come to this, he could no longer decline. The moment the emperor called him Jean, the prime minister knew that he could not escape. Right? You just mentioned the third prince. The emperor suddenly said. How is he these days? Yes. The old minister was just about to talk to you about this. The prime minister said, the third prince came out of Chun Feng Luo? That's rare. The emperor felt a little strange. Why did he come out? He moved out. The prime minister saw that the emperor seemed to have misunderstood his meaning and said again. Moved out? The emperor was happy. This kid has grown up a little. Where did he move to? He moved to the textile store next door. The prime minister said cautiously. This beast. The emperor's roar resounded throughout the imperial study, scaring the eunuchs and palace maids outside. April was the most beautiful month of the year. A poet said in a poem, You are the blooming of a tree, you are the whispering of a swallow in the beam, you are love, warmth, hope. You are the April day of the human world. Yesterday, there was a spring rain, which washed the world a little. Today, it was really a beautiful day with gentle wind and gentle sunshine. On such a comfortable day, it was only natural for something beautiful to happen. The passers-by that used to come and go were now all gathered at the entrance of a cloth store, discussing animatedly as they looked at the entrance. At the entrance of the textile store, there was a table, a chair, and a zither. Behind the table stood a handsome young master dressed in snow-white robes. This young master was extraordinarily handsome, as if he could compete with the warm April sun. A slight smile from him seemed to be able to make the delicate peach blossoms by the roadside bloom. This caused the passers-by to cry out in surprise, infatuated young girls. This young master bowed to the surroundings, smiled reservedly, and sat down. His demeanor was elegant and impeccable. The cries of surprise grew louder. The young master plucked the zither, and the whole street quieted down. The young master nodded at the textile store and began to play. He sang, "Guan Guan Jujio on the river," a fair and graceful lady, a gentleman's mate, uneven vegetables, left and right. The young master had just started with his voice and emotions, but he couldn't continue singing. The surrounding passers-by were puzzled. Cha-Cha asked, why did he stop playing? Why did he stop singing? Then they understood. Because the lady boss of the textile store raised a kitchen knife and rushed out. However, it was just a kitchen knife. It couldn't scare off the third prince, nor could it scare off the passers-by of the Middle Empire who liked to watch a show. Of course, it was also possible that they didn't react in time. Lady Xueqing's aura was aggressive and clean. She directly rushed to the front of the young master and slashed down with her saber. 5 of the 7 strings on the guqin broke with a pop sound. The sound was crisp and beautiful. The third prince had broken countless zither strings in his life, but it was the first time he found that the sound of a zither string being cut by a kitchen knife could be so pleasant to the ears. Xueqing tried to pull the kitchen knife out from the zither, but after trying twice, she found that she seemed to have used too much strength and couldn't pull it out. Staya walked to the zither, gently pinched the blade, lifted it up, and handed the handle to Xueqing. Xueqing thanked Staya and said to the third prince, "Young master, please respect yourself." She turned around and left. She left behind countless stunned passers-by, and Staya and the others who were speechless. When the Golden King heard this, he shook his head and sighed. He thought, which woman in the world is easy to deal with? Chapter 103. The originally ordinary umbrella shop had become somewhat extraordinary after the change of owner. It was not the interior decoration or the furnishings that became extraordinary, but the name was changed. It was called Li Qi Umbrella Shop. The third prince thought it was a great name. Li Ji. It was different from the outside world, where everything was thriving and the atmosphere was relaxed and comfortable. The atmosphere in the Li Qi Umbrella Shop was very depressing. There were 5 people in the small shop, but no one spoke. The third prince sat behind the counter with his head lowered. He was silent, and no one could see his expression. Bane wanted to comfort him, but he did not know where to start. He was so anxious that he scratched his head. His confession was rejected in public. Bane was afraid that the third prince would not be able to take it. He was afraid that the third prince would find a secluded place and kill himself when Bane was not paying attention. Although they had not known each other for a long time, it was still a life. Staya was holding an umbrella and had already flipped it around countless times. She no longer agreed with third young master. She felt that Miss Xueqing was truly an extraordinary woman. Such an extraordinary woman could live well even without a man to take care of her. In her opinion, a rich playboy like the third prince might not be good enough for her. Aisha looked at the third prince and sighed. She had never seen such a stupid person. They had made an agreement yesterday. Now, they did not want to make any mistakes, but they wanted to be safe. They had to be careful. Why did this happen all of a sudden? Qi Lin stood at the door and raised his head to look at the distant sky. He kept on laughing lightly. When he saw Xueqing using a saber to chop off the zither strings of the third young master, he only felt that humans were truly interesting. Although they were too weak, they were very interesting. Just as they were looking at each other in silence, a passerby could be seen walking towards them. Seeing Jilin blocking the door, he could not help but roll his eyes at him. How could this person be so stupid? Who would stand still in front of the door? The Dao was completely blocked. However, this person didn't say much. He just snorted at Jilin and walked past him. Jilin was dumbfounded. Where did this human come from? She rolled her eyes and snorted at him. When this person entered the umbrella shop, he immediately felt that the atmosphere was a little strange. He was a customer, but the boss and the staff didn't even greet him. The shop was full of people, but no one spoke and no one bought anything. Although this person found it strange, he didn't think too much about it. Strange things happened every year, so he was used to it. As a citizen of the capital, he still had this level of shrewdness. Then the man started to look at the umbrellas and walked around the store. When he passed by Staya, he politely asked Staya to move aside. Staya smiled, nodded, and stepped aside. In the end, the customer picked a white oil paper umbrella, walked to the counter, put it in front of the third prince, and said, "Boss, how much is this umbrella?" The third prince already knew that someone had come in, but he was in a bad mood and didn't bother to respond. Seeing that this person was so tactless as to talk to him, he slowly raised his head and looked at him. "Who are you? What do you want?" The third prince's words were enough to confuse anyone. The customer looked at the third prince as if he was looking at an idiot. "What do I want? I want to buy an umbrella. What do one do if I don't buy an umbrella?" "Take a walk." "I'm not buying. Get out." The customer was stunned. No matter how knowledgeable a citizen of the capital was, he had never seen such a business. He had seen people raising prices, scolding customers, and forcing customers to buy or sell, but he had never seen someone who said that he wasn't selling. However, the customer couldn't do anything. Seeing this kind of boss who didn't want to make money, he couldn't do anything. Even if the emperor came, he couldn't do anything. He snorted and turned to leave. When he passed by Jilin, he snorted again. Jilin rubbed his chin. He had made up his mind. When he left this city, he would burn this human to ashes. Third young master glanced at the white oilcloth umbrella on the table, and then looked at the figure that was leaving angrily. He muttered, "You're a big man, but you still bought a white umbrella. Do you think you're Su Xian? How can you do business like this?" Aisha couldn't stand it. The third young master stood up weakly and put the white umbrella back to its original place. "If I let him buy it, I'll have to find someone to buy it. It's quite troublesome." "Forget it," the third prince said. "Yesterday, we agreed not to ask for merit, but to not make any mistakes." Aisha saw that the third prince had started speaking and couldn't help but reprimand him. "Is this how you ask for no mistakes?" "How would I know? How would I know? It would have been better if this matter wasn't mentioned." The moment it was mentioned, the third prince couldn't help but go crazy. "I'm following the book. Logically speaking, there shouldn't be any mistakes. What book has this kind of thing written in it?" Staya had read a lot of books, so she couldn't remember there was such a book. However, seeing that the third prince was speaking so confidently, it didn't seem like he was lying. She couldn't help but ask. The third prince walked to the inside of the counter. He casually felt around and took out a book with a blurry cover. He threw it on the counter. Looking at the cover, she knew that the third prince must have flipped through this book countless times. Staya picked it up and read. The first page of the book said, "Guan Guan Jujio in the River State. Fair and virtuous lady. Fair and virtuous lady, a friend of the zither." So that's how it is. Not everything will be correct as long as you follow the book's instructions. After all, you are a well-read person. You should know this principle, Staya said as she slapped the book loudly. This book was written by the sage himself. This Guanjujio is at the top of the book and has been passed down for thousands of years. How can it be wrong? The third prince said. Bane took the book and glanced at it. He suddenly had a flash of inspiration. He leaned over and whispered in the third prince's ear. The third prince kept shaking his head, then nodding. In the end, he laughed out loud. Staya understood that he had lost his mind. Aisha felt that the third prince was totally useless. It was a very simple thing, but the third prince made it very difficult. If you used a trick like a friend of the zither during your first confession, and the girl wasn't prepared for it, she might think that you were doing it for her. She might be touched if she wasn't careful, or it could be said that she was tricked. However, if one were to act like the third young master and be rash and be rejected before using these methods, then in the eyes of this lady, it would seem extremely hypocritical. Most things were like this. If you didn't succeed in the first try, it would seem a little despicable if you tried again. Jilin glanced at Aisha. He was asking if it would work. Aisha shook her head. It was very difficult, Jilin nodded. Since it was very difficult, he would let it go. Aisha walked to Jilin's side. She followed Jilin's gaze and looked at the sky. There was nothing but the blue sky and white clouds. What are you looking at? Aisha asked curiously. Looking up at the sky when there was nothing to do and sighing about the vastness of the world and their own insignificance was something that humans often did. It was very normal. But if a megalosaurus that could fly into the sky at any time stood on the ground and looked at the sky, it would be very curious. You'll see it soon. Jilin tilted his head and smiled. Every time I see these things, I feel that humans are really a mysterious race. Even though the heavens didn't give them wings, they can still invade the domain of the sky with their own abilities. What kind of wisdom, what kind of ability, what kind of impudence? Jilin's tone was full of excitement at the beginning, but as he spoke, it became as cold as winter. It was cold and piercing, like the anger of the most majestic emperor who was offended by an ant. Aisha gently pulled Jilin's sleeve, reminding him to pay attention to the situation, so that he wouldn't accidentally blow up this elemental doppelganger. Blowing up a doppelganger was nothing to Jilin, but it would be better if it didn't affect him. Aisha looked up at the sky again. She could already vaguely see a few small dots that seemed to be flying quickly in this direction. That's our country's golden spaceship. Today should be the day that Marshal Qin returns to the capital. Third young master also raised his head to take a look. Although he didn't even see the black dot, he could easily guess what it was based on the recent events. Marshal Qinlan? Staya said. You know? The third prince asked. Yes. Staya replied with a heavy yes. Qinlan, the Middle Empire's Western Marshal. How could you not know? The Saimai Empire was west of the Middle Empire. The Grand Marshal of the West was guarding the Shengming Empire. A few years ago, before Jilin appeared, the relationship between the Middle Empire and the Saimai Empire was tense. Qinlan led her Jinshi army and fought against the Saimai Empire's Holy Cross Border Army. However, both sides were the largest empires of the human race. No one could really kill the other. At most, you would gain some benefits, and I would suffer some losses. The generals of the Shengming Empire hated Qinlan to the core. They felt that no matter what, they were still men. However, they had fought with a woman for so many years and still couldn't gain any advantage. They all felt that it was a great shame and humiliation. Staya looked at the approaching golden spaceships. She didn't expect Jilin's appearance to be able to unite the human race. If this was a few years ago, Qinlan wouldn't be able to escape from the border and return to the capital. It seemed that what that person said was indeed correct. Only a common enemy could unite the human race. Chapter 104. The 5 golden spaceships flew in a Yafeng formation in the sky, and it could be said that they were unscrupulous. There was not the slightest natural feeling of flying birds. The originally tranquil white clouds would be blown away by the wind pressure generated by the spaceships when they were far away from the spaceships. The originally harmonious sky would become a mess after the spaceships passed by. It was like a picture of harmony and myriad of scenes, but a boorish man who did not know how to read and write forcibly drew a thick and heavy stroke in the middle of the picture, destroying the scenery. Jilin thought in his heart that human beings were indeed the biggest scourge in this world. No matter where they went, the original natural environment would be changed beyond recognition. Jilin could not help but feel disgusted by such a stiff flight. In front of him, even the wyverns did not have a right to fly. As a result, there was a group of things without wings flying back and forth in front of his eyes. Jilin really did not expect that there would be such a day for him. Jilin felt that he had been insulted. He just wanted to go up to the sky and tell these humans what flying was, and then shoot them down. How could such a beautiful sky be tolerated by humans? However, no matter how Jilin thought, no matter how much he despised them, he could not deny the fact that humans really could fly. They really could frighten away the clouds. It did not only exist in the imagination of romantic poets. They had successfully broken through the bottleneck of their own race and escaped from the fate that the gods had arranged for them. Perhaps humans had really, as they said, achieved victory over the heavens. What a terrible race. They were obviously extremely lowly, but they always wanted to rebel against the supreme existence. Humans seem to like this kind of bottom-up behavior, where the weak defeated the strong. In the countless stories of humans, there were many villains, Megalosaurus, Demon King, God. They all had a common characteristic, and that was that they were far stronger than humans. They were all imaginary enemies of humans. Humans liked to defeat the originally invincible existence. At this moment, Jilin faintly understood why humans would attack him when he was in the Snow Wind Empire. It had nothing to do with blowing away the human house, nothing to do with capturing the human princess, nothing to do with blowing up the fortress of the Snow Wind Empire, and nothing to do with sending the dwarves home. Humans simply wanted to beat him up. It was a very simple reason. They only wanted to hit him when they saw him flying in the sky, just like how he wanted to hit humans when he saw them flying in the sky. Because he thought that the sky was his territory, and humans had invaded his territory. Humans, on the other hand, believe that the world belongs to them. Jilin suddenly realized that humans were such a warlike race. They were even more fanatical than the beastmen. Just look at their territory. Humans are the weakest race, but they have never lost a war. The more humans fought, the stronger they became. When the humans dominated the world and the other races couldn't even withstand a single blow, the humans would actually kill each other to vent their aggressive nature. Because now, only the humans could be the opponents of the humans. However, just as the humans were killing each other and were bored to death, he appeared. The humans once again had a worthy opponent. So that was how it was. Jilin looked at the streets, full of people who were eagerly waiting for the arrival of the spaceship. For the first time, he felt a desire to fight spontaneously rising in his body. Humans are worthy opponents. Aisha felt that the weather seemed to have suddenly become hotter. She turned her head to look at Jilin's slightly golden eyes and immediately understood. However, the heat this time was different from the usual. It wasn't as violent as before. Instead, it was more pure and more exciting. Aisha grinned without a care for her image. Her teeth were really dazzling. The 5 golden spaceships slowly landed at the southern gate of the capital. However, no matter how gentle their movements were, the earth shook. The grass in the nearby grassland was pressed down so hard that they couldn't raise their heads for a long time. No matter what, the imperial power was supreme. Above the capital, nothing was allowed to fly. The people near the southern gate could clearly feel that the border soldiers of their empire had returned. The hatch at the bottom of the golden spaceship opened, and a long suspended ladder extended out from the inside of the hatch. Then, groups of mighty and neat soldiers began to disembark from the spaceship. Each group of soldiers neatly formed a square formation in front of the southern gate of the capital. No one spoke, and no one made any unnecessary movements. Every movement was neat and uniform. Even the steps of the war horses under the cavalrymen were about the same. The discipline of this group of soldiers was amazing. When all the soldiers were in formation, a person slowly disembarked from one of the spaceships. She didn't wear a helmet, so her face could be easily seen. This was an extremely clean face. It wasn't like the meticulous makeup of an ordinary woman, but it was natural. Her long hair was casually draped over her back and was casually tied into a ponytail with a hemp rope. Her eyebrows were like the distant mountains. Her lips were like painted sand. It was as if they were tailor-made for this woman. She slowly rode her horse in the neat formation of soldiers. Her gaze casually swept back and forth, like a farmer standing in the wheat field looking at the crops that she had painstakingly cultivated. All the soldiers were looking forward, motionless. No one dared to look at this beautiful woman, because she was wearing a golden radiant armor and a crimson cloak. This was the uniform of the Middle Empire's marshal. There were only 4 sets in the entire Middle Empire, because she had guarded the western part of the empire for 13 years. Because of this, the borders of the empire were as stable as Mount Tai, because everyone here was her soldier. Marshal Qin walked to the front of the formation, walked to the left and right twice, and nodded with satisfaction. This group of people was performing well. They were dressed neatly. They didn't bring an extra knife, nor did they remove their greaves. "Listen up, all of you," Qinlan said loudly. Her strength as a level 9 diamond ranker allowed her to transmit her voice clearly to every soldier's ears. Today is the first time the Jinshi army has returned from the border to the capital to meet the emperor. All the civil and military officials are waiting for us in the imperial city. All of you, pay attention to this, marshal. This is a chance for the Jinshi army to gain some face. If any bastard dares to embarrass me in front of all the civil and military officials today, just wait for him to go back and dig for rocks. Do you understand? Yes, we obey the Grand Marshal's order. All the soldiers slammed their spears on the ground and shouted loudly. Their voices reverberated through the sky like thunder. Qinlan nodded with satisfaction. She took the golden helmet with red tassels from the deputy general beside her and put it on casually. Then she turned her horse around and shouted, "Enter the city." The southern city gate was already wide open. The Vermilion Bird Avenue had also been cleared. The road was smooth and unobstructed. On both sides of the road, countless people were shouting excitedly at the army. They were sweating profusely as they rubbed shoulders with each other. The people of the Middle Empire showed incomparable enthusiasm towards their own army. The Jinshi army entered the capital, bringing the atmosphere of war from the border into the bustling city that had never seen the flames of war. The Jinshi army slowly moved forward amidst the cheers of the people. The soldiers didn't look sideways. The army of 5,000 people only made one sound when they moved forward. Marshal Qin rode at the front of the army with a sweet smile that the soldiers had never seen before. She waved and greeted the neighbors that she hadn't seen in a long time. Perhaps because Marshal Qin saw a familiar face in the crowd, he tilted his head a little too far, allowing the soldiers behind him to see half of his smiling face. The soldiers, who had been walking in the same pace, instantly fell into disarray. Marshal Qin suddenly turned her head. Her handsome face instantly became as cold as ice. Her eyes were cold and filled with murderous intent. The entire army paused for a moment. Then, everyone stomped their feet in unison. Their voices once again returned to their uniform pace. Marshal Qin slowly turned her head back. No matter how long the Vermilion Bird Avenue was, it would eventually end. The Jinshi army arrived at the imperial city and was personally welcomed by the Minister of Rites, Lord Ouyang. After a series of long and smelly ceremonial procedures, Marshal Qin entered the palace alone to meet the emperor. As for the army behind her, it had already been arranged. The marshal dismounted and walked into the palace. Her boots collided with the stone floor of the palace, making a loud and powerful sound. Marshal Qin held her head high and walked with a majestic aura. Although she was only one person, she was full of confidence, as if there were thousands of soldiers and horses following behind her. Marshal Qin had just walked to the entrance of the Taiji Palace when a eunuch announced loudly, "The Marshal of the Western Region, Qinlan, has arrived." Qinlan walked to the front of the group of officials under the gaze of hundreds of officials. She knelt on one knee in front of the emperor who was sitting on the dragon throne and said, "Your humble servant, the Marshal of the Western Region, Qinlan, has returned to the capital to greet your majesty. Long live your majesty. Long live your majesty." The emperor walked down from his seat in front of everyone's surprised eyes. He bent down and helped Qinlan up. "My dear minister, you are the marshal of the empire. There is no need for such formalities. What are you doing? Quickly get up. You have guarded the borders for the empire for more than 10 years. You have been through a lot. All these years, my dear minister, you have suffered. Your majesty, what are you talking about?" Qinlan let the emperor help her up in fear and trepidation. She quickly said, "This is my duty. As a soldier of the empire, in order to protect the peace of the Middle Empire, I will do anything. There is no need to talk about suffering." Prime Minister Zhuge gently stroked his beard as he looked at the touching scene of the monarch and his minister getting along with each other. He thought, "Wonderful. The marshal is indeed brave and resourceful." Chapter 105. On the third day after Marshal Qin returned to the capital, Zhao Qi also returned. When he walked to the entrance of Chun Feng Lu alone, he found that Chun Feng Lu was closed during the day. She immediately jumped in fright, worried that something might have happened to the third young master. Could it be that the third prince was killed by that person during the few days when he wasn't by the third prince's side? Zhao Qi stood in front of Chun Feng Lu, carrying a small bag. The more he thought about it, the more frightened he became. Cold sweat dripped down from his forehead. The third prince was the most valued junior of his master's generation. Not to mention that the third prince had done him a great favor. But he abandoned him at his most dangerous time. How could he be worse than a pig or a dog? How could this be done by a human? How could he still have the face to live in this world? Just as Zhao Qi was struggling with whether it was better to die for a righteous cause or to avenge the third prince first and then die for a righteous cause, finally, an old man in the gang saw seventh master, Zhao, standing at the entrance of Chun Feng Lu with a very conflicted look. He quickly walked forward and told seventh master Zhao that the third prince had moved a long time ago. Moreover, a few days ago, he had done something that the people of the capital took delight in talking about. It was comparable to the deity who drank until dawn in the red light district. Li Qi umbrella shop behind the umbrella shop's counter. The third prince was lying on a reclining chair made of bamboo. He held up the book whose cover couldn't be seen and looked up to read. However, from the way he quickly flipped through the pages, it could be seen that the third prince didn't read the book. Why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? The third prince muttered. The third prince, what are you reading? A white hand with an emerald green sleeve reached over from the counter and grabbed the book in the third prince's hand. The third young master quickly closed the book and hid behind his back, avoiding that slender, jade-like hand. Sister Dyer, we have an agreement first. The third prince looked at the three beautiful women outside the counter and said nervously, You can't cross the counter, lest people see you and make Xueqing unhappy. Yo, a woman in pink heard the third prince's words and immediately screamed strangely. She said mischievously, The third prince has been patronizing our business for many years and almost took Chun Feng Lu as his home. Isn't it a bit too late to think about the etiquette between men and women? Of course, a woman in purple clothes was a woman. Besides, Miss Xue hasn't married into our family yet, but our third young master is already so scared of her. If she really marries into our family, I'm afraid we won't be able to see our third young master in Spring Breeze House for the rest of our lives. The third prince stammered. Sister Dai, this young master asked you to bring us here today, not for you to laugh at us, but for you to help us come up with ideas. The third prince, you're making things difficult for this sister. The woman in green chuckled. Tell me, this sister is very familiar with this kind of thing. But if it's someone like you who's so sincere, I really can't be sure in such a short time. You're asking the wrong person. I don't care. Don't try to fool me with this kind of thing. The third prince sat up on the armrest of the recliner and looked at the woman in green. He said somewhat shamelessly, Others don't know, but I've been in Chun Feng Lu for so many years. How can I not know your sister Dai's ability? 2 years ago, young Master Zhang and Peach Blossom Jiejie, weren't you the one who helped them get together? How come you can't be sure when it comes to me? Brother, I've always been good to you. I've only been out for a few days. The tea cools after the person leaves. Isn't it a bit too fast? You can't be so ungrateful. Although the third prince's words were pitiful, the woman in green was unmoved. She had been famous in the brothel for many years. What kind of method had she not seen? The third prince's method was not worth mentioning. Yes, third young master is right. You hit the nail on the head. The green-clothed woman smiled and said in an incomparably charming manner, The tea cools when the person is gone. The brothel isn't just doing business like this. Being ungrateful is the natural duty of a sister. The third prince has seen it clearly. No, Sister Dai, if you say so, I'm really unhappy. The third prince said very seriously. If you're too lazy to help, then don't help. How can you belittle yourself like this? Who in the capital doesn't know this? The sisters in Chun Feng Lu are the most affectionate and righteous. They are completely different from the ordinary brothel girls outside. Over the years, there have been many sisters in Chun Feng Lu who have turned over a new leaf. The story of lovers finally getting married has long been passed down. Sister Dai, You are even more untainted. Although you have fallen into prostitution, your heart has never fallen. You must not say such things. As the third prince spoke, he frequently winked at the woman in pink. The woman in green could not help but roll her eyes at the third prince. What he said was fake, but true. He was lying through his teeth, turning black into white. In the past, the brothel girls often said such things. But today, when someone suddenly said such things to her, the woman in green was stunned and did not react for a while. Only now did she know that the third prince had learned a thing or two from the sisters in Chunfeng Lu over the years. Ah, Sister Dai, I think the third prince's words have some truth. The woman in pink nodded at the third prince and said loudly, "Look at this silly boy. He has stayed in our Chunfeng Lu for so many years." Even some of the sisters did not stay as long as the third prince. He has the title of a playboy. But the result? He can't even take down a small cloth store owner. In front of so many people, he has lost so much face. He has been rolling in our brothel for so many years, but in the end, he doesn't know anything about romance. Those who know will say that the third prince is not enlightened. Those who don't know will think that we are all sisters who don't understand romance. If this spreads out, won't it be our Chun Feng Lu who loses face? Won't it be our own reputation that will be ruined? If you ask me, you should help him. The woman in green immediately opened her almond eyes and fiercely glared at the woman in pink. The woman in pink was so scared that she shrank her neck, curled her lips, and didn't say anything. The woman in green thought that Spring Peach was really young, but she dared to say anything. Relying on her close relationship with the third prince, she spoke and acted without restraint. What kind of person was the third prince? Who in Chunfeng Lu didn't know about the third prince of the empire? The third prince liking Miss Xueqing was nothing, but the attitude of the imperial palace, even a blind person could see it. The imperial palace's affairs were something that people of our status could easily be consigned to eternal damnation. Even our bones wouldn't be left behind. If you don't hide far away, do you want to drill in? Is there something wrong with your brain? No. Even if there is something wrong with your brain, you still need to have a brain. Spring Peach's words not only angered Sister Dai, but also made the third prince somewhat depressed. She was obviously helping the third prince, but the third prince just couldn't feel happy. What did she mean by, "I've been in Chunfeng Lu longer than some girls"? Although it was the truth, why did it sound so wrong? I also think that Spring Peach's words are reasonable. "Sister, you should help us with this matter," the woman in purple said. Elder Sister Dai was surprised. This Zi-Ing wasn't like Chun Tao, who didn't have a brain. Zi-Ing had entered the brothel at about the same time as her. She was an old member of Spring Breeze Brothel, so she should know how powerful it was. How could she say something like that? Sister Dai looked at Zing, waiting for her to give a reason. All these years, like Sister Peach Blossom, it was all thanks to the help of the third prince. Zing gently bowed to the third prince and said softly, "TSK." Sister Dai sighed in her heart. Zing was right. She couldn't say anything. The third prince said that the girls in Chunfeng Lu were loyal and righteous. This was a complete lie. How could there be girls in this world who were loyal and righteous? However, the third prince said that many of the girls in Chunfeng Lu had changed their lives and was unique in the Fengchun world. This was true. Most of the girls in the brothel were bought at a high price when they were young. They were provided with good food and drink since they were young. They were taught all kinds of musical instruments, chess, calligraphy, and painting skills. When they grew up, they were more attractive to men than those girls who were not as good as them. But no matter what was said, no matter how they used Chunfeng, Little Huaka, Fengyu brothel, these elegant and ancient names to cover it up. In the end, it was still the world's darkest sex business. The people who did this kind of business naturally weren't pure good people. How could they let a girl leave as soon as she saw someone she liked? Chunfeng Lu wasn't a brothel for matchmaking. It was a business that made money. In the eyes of the brothel owner, how could the girls in Chunfeng Lu be human? They were all money trees. Therefore, when a girl really liked someone, she would want to leave. The brothel owner would, of course, try to stop her. In the end, either the man was very rich and would pay a large sum of money to redeem a girl, or the man would be beaten up and thrown out, and the girl would continue to live her life as she liked. However, in Chun Fong Lu, things were different these years. If a girl wanted to leave, the owner would never stop her. More often than not, he would help her matchmake. This was why so many of the girls were able to marry into good families. Of course, this was all thanks to the third prince. The owner knew that the third prince cherished girls, so he spared no expense to please him. Speaking of which, every girl in Chun Fong Lu owed the third prince a big favor. However, in order to repay the favor of the third prince, the entire Chun Fong Lu and countless girls would be in danger. Was it really worth it? Sister, Ziying softly called out. If you really didn't want to help the third prince, you wouldn't have come today. Sister is usually such a straightforward girl, so why are you so worried now? How can I not repay the favor of the third prince? Sister Dai closed her eyes and slightly raised her head. This Ziying, she had spoken her mind out loud. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.